Chapter 1052. Feng Ling weighed the gun in her hand and estimated that there were still 6 or 7 bullets left in the gun. She looked at the people under the tree and suddenly fixed her eyes on the man between the trees in front of her. She took out 2 stones from her pocket and threw them in the opposite direction. Because the speed at which the stones were thrown was too fast, no one knew what they were, but they suddenly heard a female voice from the tree, "Be careful of explosives." When they heard these words, they couldn't immediately tell whether it was real or not. In an instant they raised their guns and quickly retreated. Feng Ling took advantage of the opportunity when they glanced in the direction of the explosives, to raise her gun and shoot the 2 men in the head. She then took the opportunity after the 2 men fell to quickly escape to the opposite tree. Taking advantage of the fact that their encirclement was forced open, she quickly continued to run to other trees. However, at this moment, several of them had already noticed her cunning in advance and chased after her. When Feng Ling was about to use the same trick again, they fired first and successfully intercepted her. Feng Ling suddenly lost her footing and fell to the ground halfway. She glanced at the wound on her arm caused by the bullet and the red mark on the skin of her arm. Noticing that those people were approaching, her eyes darkened and she turned to escape. However, without the protection of the tree, it was difficult for her to be surrounded by more than a dozen people and the guns in their hands. A good tiger can't defeat a pack of wolves. She couldn't jump up the tree above, so she could only rely on the grass below. But after all, there was not much advantage on the ground. During the 2 minutes of being chased, she had almost no room to fight back. She could only roll around to avoid being hit by the bullets. A group of people chased her relentlessly. They all had spare magazines and didn't lack bullets at all, which was even more disadvantageous for her. In the blink of an eye, 2 people fell into the pit that Feng Ling had just deliberately avoided. When 2 people fell, the guns in their hands fell into the grass and Feng Ling was suddenly shot in the arm. She endured the pain and leaned over the grass to escape to the other side, only to find that no matter how she escaped, she seemed to be trapped in this encirclement. The point was that she had gone in the opposite direction of the tree hole where Li Nanheng hid. This group of people seemed to notice something and now forced her to escape in the opposite direction. As a result, when she looked up, she could see the tall tree not far away. Without guessing, she knew that Li Nanheng was still there. She couldn't go over. She couldn't let these people find him. Feng Ling couldn't care less about the people holding guns behind her. She suddenly turned around and ran to the other side. There was no pit here and there was only a mountain wall ahead. It was a dead end, but for Li Nanheng it was a way to live. She rushed over, and just as she was about to be surrounded, there were still bullets fired in her direction. She was almost shot in the shoulder. Fortunately, she dodged to the side, and the bullet only grazed the skin of her shoulder, but she still felt a burning pain. Suddenly, she seemed to notice the movement of the helicopter above. Although this jungle was dense and deep in the jungle, she found that her and Li Nanheng's cell phone signals were still there, which meant that these people's cell phone signals were also there. No matter where they chased and where they needed support, they could find the people driving the helicopter at any time. At the moment when Feng Ling suddenly realized this, a loud noise suddenly broke out in the sky. Then she raised her head and felt as if something had fallen down. A flash of fire passed through the dense jungle and landed at her feet, causing a huge shock. Feng Ling's eyes trembled, but it was too late. She had been thrown up by the bomb that was suddenly launched by the helicopter. Her whole body was in pain, and she felt as if her internal organs were about to break. She was suddenly blown up and finally fell to the ground 10 meters away. In an instant, she felt as if there was blood in her throat, and she suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. The bomb just now was only a meter away from falling directly on her head. That was the pain of being smashed into pieces, but at such a close distance, even if her body was not smashed into pieces, the force of the explosion was enough to instantly cause internal injuries to Feng Ling. She struggled to get up from the ground, but the smell of burning was everywhere. The bomb had caused a fire everywhere. She coughed and spat out another mouthful of blood, but she could not get up no matter how hard she tried. In a blink of an eye, she saw that among the group of people who had also been affected by the bomb, one person had already raised a gun to her head. In the midst of the fire, it was clear that he was going to kill her before leaving. Feng Ling frowned and dug her fingers into the ground. There seemed to be some sounds approaching. She wasn't sure whether it was the enemy or the people from 11 base. She didn't have the energy to distinguish the movements. She just stared at the muzzle of the man's gun. She wanted to avoid it, but she couldn't even move. "Someone's coming. We've been surrounded." Suddenly, a few people behind that person shouted. Following that, a group of people hastily scattered in all directions. The man who raised the gun to Feng Ling was about to shoot her and then leave, but at the moment he pulled the trigger, he suddenly heard a gunshot. Then, Feng Ling saw the man who pointed the gun at her suddenly fell straight down. When he fell, she raised her eyes and saw Li Nanheng standing not far away with a pale face. The gun in his hand was the one that the two people who had fallen into the pit had dropped on the ground. He actually came out from inside. He was injured like this, but he could still walk out. Feng Ling looked at him in disbelief. Just as she struggled to get up from the fire on the ground, she suddenly saw people rushing out from all directions. When she saw that those people were all wearing the uniforms of 11 Base, her heart finally relaxed a little, and she instantly let herself lie on the ground powerlessly. The feeling of being blown up in her chest was so painful that she felt as if blood was about to gush out, but when the blood reached her throat, she swallowed it hard. Boss. Han Jin and Xiao Su hadn't seen clearly the man lying in the fire not far away, but when they saw the wound on Li Nanheng's body, they hurried over to support him. Then Kay, who came forward with a sniper rifle, looked in that direction. He didn't expect to meet the person he hadn't seen for 2 years here. When he saw it clearly, he suddenly let out an incredulous voice. Feng Ling. Chapter 1053. Kay's cry of surprise attracted everyone's attention to the man lying on the ground. Feng Ling slowly raised her head from the ground and looked at them with her pale, blood-stained face. They hadn't seen each other for 2 years, and now that they were reunited, she didn't know how she felt at this moment. She only remembered the scene when she left, and her hands dug deeper into the ground. Seeing that she seemed to be seriously injured, Kay hurriedly handed the sniper rifle in his hand to his brother behind him, rushed up, bent down, and hurriedly helped her up from the ground. Seeing the blood on her mouth and her staggering appearance, he frowned. "You," Feng Ling gasped and said hoarsely, "just now the bomb above landed by my feet." Kay immediately held her steady in disbelief, and his voice suddenly became serious. "Then hurry to the hospital. Quick." Feng Ling didn't have more strength to speak. When two familiar 11 Base brothers came up to help support her from behind, she heard the conversation between Han Jin and Xiao Su. "Boss, why didn't you tell us that you found Feng Ling?" Li Nanheng didn't answer. He was also supported by them. At this moment, both of them were seriously injured. There were many things that should and should not be said. It was as if they could only understand each other in their hearts. Li Nanheng just looked at Feng Ling and said indifferently, "Get on the helicopter and go back to the base. Is Dr. Wen coming with us? Call her over and let me take a look at her first." Han Jin and Xiao Su looked at the wound on Li Nanheng's back. They wanted to say that his injury was not light, but after all, Boss said so, and even though it had been 2 years, they all knew that Boss Li had been looking for Feng Ling crazily in the past 2 years. Now if they didn't let Dr. Wen take a look at Feng Ling first, Boss probably wouldn't let the doctor touch him. "Alright, let's go." As Han Jin spoke, he winked at the people around him. Some of them had already gone to chase after the scattered groups. At this moment, there was still the sound of several helicopter propellers approaching, but this time not only the enemy's planes, but also 11 Base's planes were controlling above, so the enemy couldn't find an accurate position to throw explosives for the time being. The area behind Feng Ling was already on fire. In this kind of jungle, any fire was very dangerous. Her chest hurt so much that she felt as if her whole body would split open at any time. However, when Kay and the others were about to help her out nervously, she said in a low voice, "I won't go back to 11 Base. Just send me to the hospital." Although her voice was low and soft, almost everyone around her could hear her. Kay immediately looked at her in disbelief. "Feng Ling, do you know that Boss Li has been looking for you for 2 years? In the past 2 years, Boss has been trying to find a way to get you back. 11 Base can't live without you." What Grandfather Li did was not reasonable at all. Boss is the person in charge of the base. As long as Boss says you can return to the sniper team, you will still be a member of our 11 Base. Shouldn't you go back now? Feng Ling didn't have much emotion. When she was supported by Kay to walk out, she swallowed the blood in her mouth and struggled to support her energy at this moment, but she still said with difficulty in a low voice, "I won't go back." As soon as she said this, Li Nanheng had stopped walking forward and turned back to look at her. At this moment, Feng Ling also raised her head and looked in his direction, only to see his pale face and calm eyes. Feng Ling, Han Jin and Xiao Su held Li Nanheng's hand and kept paying attention to the wound on his back. They frowned and said, "It's not easy for Boss to find you. There was a misunderstanding at that time. At that time we already knew your gender, but we didn't expose you. Most people in 11 Base still accept you. Don't feel ashamed or hurt because of what those bastards of Team 3 said. We can all understand you. Now that you are injured, let's go back together." "I'll say it again." Feng Ling listened to their words, looked straight into Li Nanheng's eyes and said word by word clearly, I, Feng Ling, swore 2 years ago that in this life, I will never step into 11 base as a trainee of 11 base. Even if I die here, I will not go back. Feng Ling, I know you are unhappy, but now is not the time to make trouble. Don't make trouble? Kay whispered beside her. Feng Ling's eyes were indifferent. I'm not making trouble. Let me go. I'll go by myself. Are you kidding me? How can you walk like this? Kay said as he looked at the blood on her mouth. You vomited blood. Who do you think you are? If you can walk out of the jungle like this, I can call you grandma. Feng Ling's pale face was expressionless, and she tried to stand upright when she was supported by Kay. She didn't have any intention to rely on anyone in 11 base. Deep in her bones, there was already some kind of hatred and shadow of 11 base that was influenced by obsession. Xiao Su held Li Nanheng's arm and felt that Boss Li's body temperature was decreasing bit by bit. Boss was seriously injured, but obviously, what hurt him more was Feng Ling, who seemed to have abandoned him. Facing the person he hadn't seen for 2 years, Xiao Su looked at Feng Ling and said, Feng Ling, we know you have hatred in your heart, but your hatred is also because you once loved him. Just like your hatred for 11 base, that is because you once loved that place deeply. Just like your hatred for Boss Li, it is also because you once loved. I've never loved. Feng Ling frowned. Li Nanheng's eyes, which were almost unable to focus because of his serious injury, suddenly focused because of her words, and his dark and deep eyes looked straight at her. Xiao Su was speechless because of Feng Ling's decisive words. Looking at this girl who was driven out of the base but now was obviously more ruthless than all of them, he found that even though he knew she was ruthless, he couldn't find a word to blame her. Yes. Anyone who saw her lying on the ground outside the Hall of 11 base and being humiliated, slandered, and driven out of the base by several elders could understand her feelings. If it were anyone else, they would not be willing to step into that place again. You've never loved, have you? At this time, Li Nanheng's low, hoarse voice sounded. Even though it was weak because of excessive blood loss, it was still particularly clear and cold in the quiet jungle. Feng Ling didn't look at him but looked away. I want to chat with more like-minded people about young Master Mo. Have you kissed enough? Talk about life, and find a confidant. Please remember the domain name of this book. For mobile version website, M. Chapter 1054. Seeing that she was unwilling to look at him, Li Nanheng slowly narrowed his cold eyes. Feng Ling, I have never been as honest to anyone as I am to you in my life. Feng Ling was still supported by Kay and leaned against Kay weakly. She looked at the tree trunk not far away and refused to look at the man. Whether you hate or resent what happened 2 years ago, I can give you a reasonable explanation. Even if you can't understand, at least I won't allow these misunderstandings to happen. I told you again and again that I didn't marry any woman, but you never believed me. Fine, I was too confident at that time. I thought that I could take care of both inside and outside, but I ignored your feelings. So I deserve everything that I'm suffering now. The man's low voice sounded haggard and tired, hoarse and cold. No matter what happened, I have never hidden anything from you. I am calm and fearless. My heart is at least pure and sincere to you, but when you deny everything that happened in the past, you also deny yourself, right? Li Nanheng's voice was so cold that both Han Jin and Xiao Su could feel the coldness in Boss's heart at this moment. In addition, they had been holding him, feeling that his body temperature was decreasing bit by bit. They wanted to say that they couldn't delay any longer, or Boss would lose his life. But now they didn't dare to say a word and could only try their best to support him. Under the gaze of the brothers of 11 base, Feng Ling didn't say anything more but just replied, "There's no need to deny it." Nothing happened. Hearing this, Kay immediately pinched Feng Ling's arm hard, reminding her not to challenge Boss's bottom line. Boss had been looking for her for 2 years and had finally found her after much difficulty. Furthermore, both of them were heavily injured, so why did they have to hurt each other at this time? However, it was clear that Feng Ling's heart had been sealed to the point where nothing could enter. Even the slightest change in her expression was suppressed by calmness after she returned from the dangerous situation. There were some things that she should have thought through 2 years ago. She should have held on to them back then so that she wouldn't have left covered in wounds. Li Nanheng looked at her as if he couldn't see all the members of 11 base around him. He only looked at her face and asked, "Have you ever loved me?" The members of 11 base had heard about the relationship between Feng Ling and Boss Li before, but it had always been a wild rumor and everyone was skeptical. Later, when they learned that Feng Ling was a woman, although they were surprised, at least they didn't have other ideas like those bastards in Team 3. But now that they saw this scene and heard this sentence, all of them held their breaths and didn't dare to make a sound. "No," Feng Ling answered straightforwardly. Li Nanheng immediately sneered. His laughter seemed to come from his chest. The man's pale face seemed warm under the reflection of the flames behind Feng Ling, but upon closer inspection, it was extremely cold. "Never liked it?" he asked again. Feng Ling's hands slowly clenched into fists. "No." Li Nanheng sneered at her. "Ridiculous." Kay felt that his heart was almost frozen by this scene and kept muttering in his heart, "My little princess Feng Ling, don't provoke boss anymore. Look at boss, take a look at him." However, Feng Ling obviously couldn't feel Kay's worry. She just leaned against his side weakly and said in a low voice, "My life in Boston is peaceful. The kidnapping you encountered that day was just a coincidence. The source of the matter is not me. I'm not in any other danger. Thank you, Boss Li, for saving me once. But today I also saved you once, so we're even." Li Nanheng just looked at her and didn't speak. Everyone felt that Boss Li should be exhausted. They knew that they should quickly help him back, but now no one dared to move or say a word, especially Han Jin and Xiao Su beside Li Nanheng. Facing Boss Li, who was almost broken into pieces, and Feng Ling, who was as hard as an unbreakable iron stone, they didn't even dare to breathe. "Have you ever loved me?" Li Nanheng seemed to be unwilling to give up and asked again, but this time his voice was calm and low, which made people's hearts cold. Feng Ling frowned as if impatiently and answered hoarsely, "Yes." Li Nanheng suddenly sneered, abruptly shook off Han Jin and Xiao Su's hands, staggered and barely stood still. He looked straight at the woman who refused to turn her head to him and asked with gritted teeth, "Let me ask you again, have you ever loved me?" At this time Feng Ling finally turned her eyes and met his gaze. Instead of analyzing the emotions in his eyes, she replied coldly, "Yes, Li Nanheng. It's just a relationship that has no result and doesn't need a result. I'm still young and ignorant, but I've never loved you. I've never loved you." Li Nanheng froze there, looked at her, and was silent for 5 seconds. Feng Ling also looked straight at him, her eyes full of firmness, indifference, and relief, as if she could finally say goodbye to her poor self 2 years ago. Just when Han Jin and Xiao Su couldn't stand it anymore, feeling that Boss Li had never been so frustrated in their lives, they rushed forward to support him, but the man in front of them ignored their outstretched hands, waved them away expressionlessly, and suddenly walked straight toward Feng Ling. It was only a distance of 5 or 6 steps, but every time the man took a step forward, his face became paler and bloodless. Feng Ling didn't know what he was doing and just watched him approach. Kay didn't know what to do now. He was about to speak, but Feng Ling, who was being supported by him, was suddenly grabbed by the man approaching him. She was also seriously injured and couldn't support her body at all, so she stumbled into Li Nanheng's arms. Feng Ling thought he was crazy. When she was about to ask him if he was crazy, the man suddenly clasped her chin, bent down, and kissed her hard. Her eyes widened in an instant. She wanted to push him away, but she didn't have the strength to raise her hands. Her entire body was imprisoned in the man's embrace. He hugged her waist and back, kissing her fiercely as if he wanted to strangle her alive. She only felt that there was a certain taste of blood in both of their mouths. When the taste of blood mixed together, she felt pain all over her body. It was so painful that even her lips and tongue were bitten and sucked by the man cruelly and fiercely, but she didn't feel it. Her entire body was a little stiff, and she wanted to struggle but couldn't. She was kissed crazily in front of everyone. "I want to chat with more like-minded people about young Master Mo. Have you kissed enough? Talk about life, and find a confidant." Please remember the domain name of this book. For mobile version website, M. Chapter 1055. Everyone was shocked, but no one dared to stop them. What a joke. This was the first time Boss had kissed a girl in public. Most importantly, the one being kissed was Feng Ling. Even if the two of them were covered in blood and looked battered and exhausted, the visual stimulation was still exhilarating. Yes, that's how it should be. If you love someone, then so be it. What's there to hate? If you don't want to admit your love, then just give it a kiss. Why are you talking so much nonsense? Of course, Feng Ling couldn't hear the cheers in the hearts of this group of people. She just frowned and wanted to push the man in front of her away, but Li Nanheng seemed to use all his strength to hold her, and the force on his lips was so fierce that she couldn't resist it. Her body was already unable to hold on, and now she was seeing stars. She wanted to push him away, but she was still powerless and could only lean against his arms to support herself. She didn't know what was wrong with this man, but he kissed her fiercely. Just as she was about to suffocate, he suddenly let go of her and said hoarsely in a voice that only she could hear, Remember what you said today. Feng Ling's eyes were a bit stiff. She looked at the man in front of her, but before she could see the emotions in his eyes, she suddenly felt a weight in front of her. The man suddenly pressed his whole body against her. She immediately realized that Li Nanheng finally couldn't hold on anymore. Kay quickly held her from behind. Han Jin and Xiao Su also rushed forward to support Li Nanheng, who had fainted in front of Feng Ling. Boss Li. Boss. Feng Ling, however, was supported by Kay and stood motionless. She looked stiffly at the pale-faced Li Nanheng, who was being helped up by them. Looking at his closed eyes, she felt as if there were countless knives grinding hard in her heart, causing her pain. Seeing the old and new wounds on Li Nanheng's back, Xiao Su suddenly looked at Feng Ling with red eyes, stared at her pale face and said word by word, "Kay, send Miss Feng to the hospital." Kay immediately frowned. "Aren't we going back to the base? Take her to the hospital." Han Jin also said, but he didn't look at Feng Ling again. Instead, he quickly called someone over to send Li Nanheng out. He had lost too much blood. If he stayed here any longer, even his iron body couldn't bear it. Kay didn't speak anymore. Feng Ling stood there. She didn't know if the fire behind her had already begun to burn, but it was so painful that even her whole body felt as though it had been burned. Kay sent her to the hospital as Feng Ling wished. Although he was injured by the explosion, fortunately, there were no external burns. The pain in his internal organs was also due to the huge shock he received at that time. He needed a long time to recuperate. Because there were no external or internal injuries, there were no blood clots, and he could not undergo any surgery. Therefore, Feng Ling only stayed in the hospital for 2 days. After being forced to stay there for observation for 2 days, she went home. But the community where she lived, because of what happened at that time, had been cordoned off by the police. Because the police had to investigate the scene, no one was allowed to enter. So she simply went to live in the martial arts club. There were several temporary rest rooms and dormitories prepared for coaches. Although it was only a very simple half-person bed and a small room of only 6 or 7 square meters, it was enough for her to live in. She didn't lack anything. After sending Feng Ling to the hospital, Kay was originally guarding her, but then he was called away for some reason. Feng Ling didn't tell anyone. When she came back, it was a weekend night. There was no one in the martial arts club. She opened the door, found a rest room, and lay down without even turning on the light. Her whole body was still in great pain and she was completely exhausted. In the past 2 days in the hospital, she hardly slept much. Even if she fell asleep, she had been having messy nightmares, and her mental state was in a state of tension that she couldn't understand. When it was almost dawn, she finally fell asleep. Vaguely, she seemed to hear something outside, the conversation between the head coach and the boss, and the voices of other familiar people working here. The door of her room was closed and no one knew she was here. She closed her eyes to sleep and didn't intend to get up. In the afternoon, Feng Ling got up from the bed with some difficulty. The pain all over her body hadn't disappeared. She sat in the room for a while and then took a look at the time. Today was Monday and she still had 2 classes to attend in the afternoon. Although her current condition might not be suitable for class, she was already here. Even if she only used the verbal method to attend class and did not do much, it would still be the same. Anyway, they were all students for a long time and she did not need to teach them everything. Thinking of this, Feng Ling got up and went out. When she stood up, she was still a little shaky, but fortunately she could still stand. When she walked out of the restroom, the head coach happened to come here to get something. Suddenly seeing Feng Ling coming out of the door, he looked at her in surprise. "When did you come here? You've been missing for the past 2 days. I couldn't find you on the phone. I heard that something happened to your place. The boss and I were about to go to the police station to report it. Why are you?" "It's okay. Sorry to make you worry. I slept here last night." Feng Ling explained and walked out. The head coach looked at her pale and haggard face and turned to ask her a few more questions. Feng Ling didn't answer but went straight to the classroom. In the afternoon, during the class, Feng Ling sat in the front seat and watched them have class. Qin Beiqing was in this class and Qin Beiqing had been paying attention to her. He felt that she didn't look good. She seemed to have lost a lot of weight in just 2 or 3 days. She didn't look right. Originally, he planned to ask her what happened after class, but when the class was only halfway through, a group of people in black uniforms broke in and broke the peace in the martial arts club. Feng Ling was asked to leave. All the people in the martial arts club looked at those people in black uniforms, standing in 2 rows from the door to the inside. Looking at their majestic appearance, they couldn't guess what had happened. Feng Ling was called out. She walked out and saw that these people were wearing the uniforms of 11 base. She stood inside and looked at the door without saying anything. Then a man in the same black uniform came in, but his armband and chest tag were more than others, so it could be seen that he was not a simple person. It was Han Jin. Feng Ling looked at him. Han Jin came in expressionlessly and walked up to Feng Ling. "Miss Feng, come with us." Feng Ling was stunned. Feng Ling raised her eyes. "I've already said what I should say. Where do you want me to go?" Han Jin's tone was indifferent. "Boss hasn't woken up yet. You have to go with us. When he wakes up safely, I will let you go immediately. I want to chat with more like-minded people about young Master Mo. Have you kissed enough? Talk about life, and find a confidant." Please remember the domain name of this book. For mobile version website, M. Chapter 1056. There was a hint of surprise in Feng Ling's calm eyes. "Still not awake? Come with us." Although Han Jin's attitude was cold, he was not too tough on her. He just looked at her and said, "You should know boss's identity. If he really dies here, all of us will have to bear the consequences. You must go with me now. In addition, the remaining members of the drug gangs have not been cleaned up yet. Some of them already know about you. It is not safe for you to be outside alone. After the boss wakes up and gives us new instructions and arrangements, we will act according to his arrangements. Now, first, for the sake of the boss, you have to go with us. Second, for your safety, you have to go with us." "I'm safe here," Feng Ling said calmly. "Why do you have to break the peace of my life? You are living very peacefully. Do you know how turbulent the base has been these 2 years? Does 11 base still have anything to do with me? Even if the entire 11 base is gone, it doesn't seem to be my fault." Feng Ling looked at him coldly. "Han Jin, I don't owe 11 base anything. But you owe Boss Li a favor." "Do I owe him anything?" "This kind of thing only the two of you know. After all, I am an outsider." Han Jin said faintly, "You don't look very well. Did the doctors in the hospital observe your injury for a few days? Dr. Wen happened to be here and Miss Wen also came here. You are close to Miss Wen. Let her take a look at you." Han Jin's words were very polite, but it was obvious that if she dared to resist, the members of 11 base would definitely take her away, and it was very likely that the entire martial arts club would be implicated. Kay didn't come, nor did anyone who was familiar with her. Because as long as those people came, many of them would be soft-hearted towards her and would not forcefully drag her away. Han Jin knew her too well, so since he wanted to take her away by force, he wouldn't let those people come over. The people standing in 2 rows were all elite members of 11 base. They were also people who rarely interacted with Feng Ling. They didn't have any intimate feelings for her. If she resisted, they could even pull out their guns and shoot her. What's going on? The head coach didn't understand what was going on. Although he had long known the relationship between Li Nanheng and Feng Ling and 11 base, now the martial arts club was surrounded by people from 11 base and they were obviously going to take Feng Ling away. Seeing Feng Ling's reluctant look, he walked out, subconsciously shielded Feng Ling behind him, and then looked down at her. "It's fine. They're all old friends. Let me go with them," Feng Ling said indifferently. "Old friend, where are you going? Do you need to make such a big fuss?" The head coach frowned with a cold face and turned to look at Han Jin. Seeing this head coach's unkind eyes, Han Jin didn't speak, nor did he pay attention to his eyes. He just passed him and continued to look at Feng Ling, who was standing in place. "Let Miss Wen take a good look at your injury. If you really have any internal injury, you can't delay it. Otherwise, if you have any old disease in the future, it won't be worth it." "What's wrong with you?" The head coach looked at Feng Ling and looked at her carefully. He had felt that she looked very pale before. In this way, a lot of things that others didn't know had happened to her in the past few days. "It's nothing. I'll go with them." Feng Ling didn't want to explain, nor did she want to tell them about the drug gangs, bombs, and guns. Only those who stayed in 11 base all year round didn't feel anything about these things. Others who lived in a peaceful world were not suitable to get involved in it. "It sounds like our coach Ling has a special relationship with 11 base." Several students had just walked out of the classroom. After watching for a while, they lowered their voices and whispered to each other. Chen Beiqing looked at Feng Ling, who was almost surrounded by a group of people, and then at the head coach, who was obviously ignored by everyone. Thinking of the various similar movements he saw on the so-called intern coach a few days ago, it was not difficult to see that many things Feng Ling learned were taught by that person. Chen Beiqing walked over and looked at Feng Ling. "If you don't want to go, don't go." Feng Ling didn't speak, but Han Jin looked at Chen Beiqing coldly. "Boy, don't talk about things that don't belong to you. Be careful not to get yourself into trouble." "I'm talking to my woman. What does it have to do with you?" Chen Beiqing glanced at him mockingly. Your woman? Han Jin looked at him as if he had heard some news, and then looked at Feng Ling, who was speechless and obviously didn't have the energy to explain, and then looked at him with a sneer. What's your name? Do you think you've lived too long? Qin Beiqing was about to speak, but Feng Ling quickly turned around and pressed his arm, signaling him not to speak. All right, I'll go with them. They are all my old acquaintances. They won't do anything to me. Don't worry. Hearing Feng Ling's words, Qin Beiqing looked at her and asked in a low voice, Are you from 11 Base? They are 11 Base in Los Angeles, the mysterious and powerful military base under the name of the United Nations? Feng Ling didn't explain. She just glanced at him and said in a low voice, Don't be nosy. Just be yourself. Other things have nothing to do with you. Now they want to take you away by force? Feng Ling lowered her eyes and said indifferently, Their boss was injured because of me and hasn't woken up yet. I do have the responsibility to go and see him. Who is their boss? Qin Beiqing guessed something but still wanted an accurate answer. Li Nanheng. Qin Beiqing looked at her for a moment and said, You have such great ability at such a young age. Did he teach you? Feng Ling nodded. No wonder. No wonder every time Li Nanheng appeared in the classroom, she was either the one who was abused or the one who couldn't integrate into the two of them. It turned out that he was the real boss. This was also the secret that Coach Ling had kept here for 2 years. Qin Beiqing clenched his hands into fists, looked at her haggard face and said again, I still say the same thing. If you don't want to go, you don't have to. Don't force yourself. At this moment, Han Jin winked at the people behind him, and 2 people came forward to help Feng Ling to the side. Although they helped her, they obviously kept a distance between her and the 2 men. Miss Feng, let's go. Han Jin didn't bother to deal with these people and just looked at Feng Ling. Please remember the domain name of this book. For mobile version website, M. Chapter 1057. Feng Ling was about to turn to leave, when Qin Beiqing suddenly raised his hand to hold her wrist and stared at her. At this moment, silence spoke louder than words. Feng Ling knew what he wanted to say. Sorry. Feng Ling said as she gently pushed his hand away, then turned her eyes to the other people in the martial arts club and finally to the head coach's face. She nodded politely and gratefully to him and then turned to follow Han Jin out. After walking out of the martial arts club, Feng Ling saw the tall 11 base cars parked outside. For a moment, she felt that everything she had lived in the past 2 years was just a fleeting cloud, and everything in front of her was familiar. Even though 2 years had passed, she didn't feel strange at all. Go to the first car. Han Jin didn't look happy. After walking over with Feng Ling, he opened the car door and turned to look at her. Get in the car, Miss Feng. It seemed that after this reunion, every time Han Jin called her Miss Feng, his tone would be colder. Feng Ling turned to look at him. His bullet didn't hurt his vital parts. He just lost too much blood. Why hasn't he woken up after so long? Has it been that long? Only 2 days have passed. Han Jin said calmly, I know you don't want to see him. Coincidentally, if he wakes up now, I don't want you to appear in front of him again to stimulate him. He really hasn't woken up. Dr. Wen, Miss Wen, and Dr. Qin, who happened to come to Boston for business, have all come, but he still hasn't woken up. We can't find the reason. Maybe he is too tired to look for you in the past 2 years and suddenly can't move. He wants to sleep for a few more days. Feng Ling's fingers slowly clenched. So the reason you called me over is? Get in the car first. Feng Ling turned to get into the car. As soon as she sat in, Han Jin closed the door expressionlessly, walked around the car, opened the door and sat in the driver's seat. Only then did Feng Ling notice that the others who followed her were all in the cars behind, and only she and Han Jin were in the first car. Han Jin said casually while starting the engine, If anything happens to Boss Li, do you think I will let you off? Hearing his words, Feng Ling was not surprised. She knew very well how loyal Han Jin and Xiao Su were to 11 Base and Li Nanheng. Han Jin and Xiao Su took good care of her. Firstly, it was because of their relationship in the base, and secondly because Li Nanheng treated her differently, so they paid special attention to her. Otherwise, how could she have had such a great honor to go to Han Jin's place to get wine as she pleased? She turned to look at the scene passing by quickly outside the car window and gently placed her hand on the car window. So, are you taking me to 11 Base or somewhere else? Dr. Wen and his friend opened a private hospital in Boston. It's not suitable to go to a public hospital for gunshot wounds. You can either go back and treat it yourself or find a private place. Dr. Wen's place is not a problem. Because Boss is seriously injured, we're temporarily staying in Boston. As Han Jin spoke, he pressed the rear lights of the car to signal the car following behind him. Then he drove the car into a main road at the side of the fork and drove straight forward. Through the rearview mirror, Feng Ling could see the martial arts club getting farther and farther away until it disappeared. She had a strong hunch that she might not be able to come back to this martial arts club. Even if she came back, she might not be able to work normally again. Thinking of the look in the eyes of the head coach and Chen Beiqing just now, they could clearly see it. After she left, it was uncertain whether they would meet again. Feng Ling leaned against the seat. Even if Han Jin just said he would not let her off, she still sat there relaxed because the person beside her was someone who knew her very well. She didn't need to be vigilant. She just thought that after 2 years she finally lived a normal life outside and finally learned a little bit of human nature, but in the end, it seemed that everything did not belong to her. If you're tired, go to sleep. It will take at least half an hour to drive from here to the private hospital under Dr. Wen's name. It's okay. I'm not tired. You look very pale. Why don't you stay in the hospital for a few more days? It's not necessary. Feng Ling said and asked, why did Miss Wen come to Boston? Dr. Wen's contract with 11 Base has expired and may not be renewed. There are private hospitals under his name all over the United States. He plans to integrate them into a large hospital chain and find a place to settle down. Miss Wen directly quit her job in Los Angeles Hospital and chased after him everywhere. Wherever Dr. Wen went, she would go. You probably don't understand the grudges between the brother and sister. Even I don't understand it. Han Jin said as he took a thin blanket from behind and threw it on her. Cover it and sleep for a while. Although he said he would not let her off and looked as if he was going to take revenge on her, he still couldn't bring himself to do it. Feng Ling looked at the thin blanket that was suddenly thrown into her arms, gave a faint smile, and gratefully covered her legs and body. She sat there and looked at the cars following in the rearview mirror. Most of these people look familiar, but they seem to be our batch of newcomers. It seems that these people are now qualified to enter the elite team. They are still far behind you. Han Jin was still driving seriously. Feng Ling turned to look at him. Are the 4 people in the sniper team still the same? 5. Feng Ling paused. That's right. There have always been 5 places. I took someone else's place. When I leave, someone has to quickly replace me, lest it affects the training of the whole team. There is no substitute. They have been waiting for you to go back. Every time there is a sniper team activity, they will prepare a set of weapons and uniforms for you. In the past 2 years, your things have been piled up in your original room. Kay and Lin Qing have helped you tidy up. You have never left 11 Base. Feng Ling was silent for a moment. Han Jin continued to drive as he said, when we drove you out of 11 Base, it was just the words of the elders at that time. In fact, 11 Base, a place supervised by the United Nations, must have an official document to expel any mature member. At that time there was nothing. They just let you go verbally, which meant that you were still a member of 11 Base in name. You just left temporarily. Feng Ling, you still belong to 11 Base. Feng Ling didn't know whether she was surprised or not, but something that seemed to have died in her heart was beating again bit by bit. Did she still belong to 11 Base? Please remember the domain name of this book. For mobile version, M. Chapter 1058. When they arrived at Dr. Wen's private hospital in Boston, the specifications of this hospital were not small. It looked very simple on the outside, but after entering they saw that the inside was well equipped. Although it was a private hospital, it was no less than the largest hospital in the United States. Even the medical staff here were very well educated and many of them were top doctors in the medical field. After arriving at the hospital, Han Jin asked if Boss Lee had woken up and got the answer that he hadn't woken up yet and was still under observation. He turned back and gestured for the others to send Feng Ling to the ward upstairs. Sending her to the ward was to let her have a good examination of her previous internal injuries. Since Feng Ling was already here, she couldn't refuse. She just walked while thinking that the blow on Li Nanheng's neck was indeed not light. This time, the coma caused by excessive blood loss might be related to the injury on the back of his neck. Hopefully it didn't hurt his mind or nerves. Otherwise, it would easily affect his physical condition in the future. Although she was very familiar with many vulnerable parts and acupuncture points of the human body, she was not a doctor after all. She did not know how badly he was injured. In her memory, when he was in the car, his back and the seat were bleeding like a river. In short, his injuries were not light. After entering the ward, a young female nurse came in and helped her change into light clothes, which was a light-colored hospital gown. Then she took her to do a few tests and sent her back to rest. The ward that they arranged for her had a TV, internet, a built-in bathroom, a sofa, a coffee table and a kitchen. It was a ward that was similar to a high-end luxury suite. The bed was not white like a normal ward, but it was mostly light-colored. It seemed that even if she stayed here temporarily, she would not feel uncomfortable. It was exactly the feeling between a normal suite and a ward. It was very cozy, and this room was more than 10 floors above the hospital. The downstairs of this side of the window was a residential area, not a downtown area, so it was very quiet. The boss of the martial arts club had just called her. Feng Ling took the phone and briefly said something about herself. Then she heard someone knocking on the door of the ward. She hung up the phone and turned back to see Wen Liqing. Wen Liqing pushed the door open and walked in. When she saw Feng Ling sitting by the bed, her eyes lit up. "I thought you were resting. Why aren't you asleep?" Feng Ling was very calm. "If it were you, would you be able to sleep if you were suddenly brought here by a group of people from 11 Base? Wen Liqing didn't know much about how Feng Ling was brought here. Hearing her words, she smiled, walked in and looked at Feng Ling's face carefully. "You're also injured, right? I know Han Jin brought you back, but I don't know how he brought you back. I think he knows your temper and wants to take you to treat your injury, but you definitely won't agree. Maybe only by forcing you will you obediently give in." Wen Liqing didn't know how Feng Ling was brought here. Feng Ling didn't say anything more about this matter. She just looked at her. "You quit your job at Los Angeles Hospital?" "Okay." Wen Liqing smiled. Feng Ling was not a gossipy person, nor was she too curious about other people's affairs, but she did feel a little curious about the matter between Wen Liqing and Dr. Wen, but at least she could restrain her curiosity. She just nodded and didn't ask more. "I heard from them that you were seriously injured." "What? Didn't you see a doctor in the hospital?" Wen Liqing said as she came over to take Feng Ling's hand, touched it, and then looked at her. "I just heard from them that you seem to be injured by a bomb. Did you go to take an X-ray?" "It's okay. The shock will definitely make me uncomfortable for a while. When I was on a mission in 11 Base, I often encountered a bomb close to me. As long as it doesn't fall on my head, it's not a big deal." Feng Ling was about to take her hand back. Wen Liqing still took her hand and looked at her. "Feng Ling, these 2 years, did you tell him that I was here or did he find out by himself?" Feng Ling asked in a low voice. Wen Liqing looked at her for a while and then smiled. "I helped you hide it for 2 years. How could I suddenly tell him? That was it." Sure enough, she had been hiding so well, but in the end she still exposed all her whereabouts because she went to participate in a competition. As Wen Liqing spoke to her, she checked her body, and then got up to call the doctor in the hospital to arrange an X-ray for her, saying that she needed to check her internal organs and other injuries. Feng Ling had been checked in the hospital before and remembered that the doctor said it was not too serious. Besides, she didn't really want to stay in the hospital for observation, so in the end she left. Seeing that there were no relatives or friends around her, the doctor let her go and didn't care about her anymore. But Wen Liqing couldn't let it go, so Feng Ling had to cooperate with the doctor to take an X-ray and then go back to the ward to wait. Not long after, Wen Liqing came back with her X-ray and looked at her with a relieved look. "Fortunately, it's just a temporary fluctuation of your internal organs caused by the violent air vibration. You may feel pain, but the injury is not serious. Don't do any strenuous exercise recently. You must keep a good rest. You will be fine in a few days." With that, Wen Liqing helped Feng Ling lie down by the bed and then looked at Feng Ling. She seemed to want to say something, but after a while she finally took back her words. Everything these people wanted to say was because of Li Nanheng. Feng Ling knew it in her heart. Seeing that she didn't say anything, she didn't take the initiative to ask. She also knew the reason why she was forcibly brought here. Just when Feng Ling thought that Wen Liqing would let her rest alone after she had nothing to say, Wen Liqing suddenly said, "Do you want to accompany Nanheng?" Feng Ling didn't have any expression on her face and just looked at her. "Why?" "There is no one in his ward." Feng Ling looked away. "It has nothing to do with me. I was forcibly brought here not to see him. You know in your heart whether you want to see him or not. Women can understand women. You are too unsociable and strong-willed, so of course you don't want others to see your most vulnerable side. Just like when you were driven out of 11 Base 2 years ago, you didn't even shed a tear or complain after you woke up," Wen Liqing said gently. "Just like now, you clearly miss him in your heart but you refuse to admit it. Now there is no one else in his ward, so you don't have to worry that someone will see it. Please remember the domain name of this book. For mobile version website, M. Chapter 1059. In fact, Feng Ling didn't know what she was thinking, but under Wen Liqing's persuasion she temporarily gave up the idea of not going to see Li Nanheng. Since he was already here, she might as well go and take a look at his injury. After all, he was injured because of her. Walking to the door of Li Nanheng's ward, Wen Liqing waved at her, motioning her to go in quickly. Feng Ling hesitated, pushed the door open, and entered. The ward was very quiet. Li Nanheng seemed to be still unconscious. Feng Ling looked at the door for a while, then walked to the bedside, looked at the man lying quietly on the bed, and then looked at the ring-shaped medical device on his neck to fix the cervical vertebra. Even with such a strange white ring-shaped thing, it didn't affect the man's appearance at all. She knew that this thing probably had something to do with the displacement of the cervical vertebra or the injury on the back of his neck. Then she saw the translucent white tape on the back of the man's hand because he had just had an injection. The man's hand was quietly placed on the bedside, and even his fingers didn't move. He really didn't wake up. Feng Ling stood by the bed and watched for a long time. She recalled how he sat in the tree hole and looked at her with a pale face. She recalled how she coldly denied everything that had happened and how he looked at her when she said that she had never loved him. She looked at him for a long time until she suddenly saw the man's hand quietly placed on the quilt seem to move slightly. Then she looked carefully and saw that his fingers seemed to move. She looked at the man's pale face again and saw that he seemed to show signs of waking up, and his handsome brows were faintly furrowed. Wen Liqing was guarding outside the ward when she suddenly heard the door open. She looked back and saw Feng Ling coming out. "Why don't you stay in there a little longer? He may be waking up soon. Call Dr. Wen and the others to come and see him," Feng Ling said and walked in the direction she came from. Wen Liqing watched her leave without hesitation, turned back to tell the nurse and then chased after her. She didn't let Feng Ling go back to the ward directly but took her to do several other examinations on the way, and then asked her to go back to the ward to wait. It was getting dark. 3 hours had passed since Feng Ling visited Li Nanheng's ward. In the past 3 hours, except for checking her condition, she stayed in the ward and did not go out, nor did she see anyone from 11 base. When it was dinner time, the hospital sent in a special nutritional set meal. The food was placed in the ward, and the taste was light and fragrant. Feng Ling did not have much appetite and did not eat it. She sat on the bed alone, but her eyes were looking out the window. When Wen Liqing came in again, the food was already cold. Seeing Feng Ling didn't eat, Wen Liqing walked over. "Why don't you eat?" "I'm not hungry. You seem to be under house arrest by the people of 11 base. In fact, they are just concerned about your health. I just met Han Jin. He didn't explain anything. He only said that you are a member of 11 base. Without the permission of the base, you are not allowed to work in other places. They didn't care about you for the past 2 years, but now that they have found you, they won't let you mess around outside." Han Jin had said this to her once before. Although he didn't say it so specifically, Feng Ling understood what he meant. "I see." Hearing Feng Ling's calm words, Wen Liqing looked at her for a while, then went out to call the nurse in to take away the cold dinner and ask them to send a new one. When the new dinner was sent, Wen Liqing urged Feng Ling to eat it. Under her gentle and enthusiastic attack, Feng Ling ate a little, but she didn't have a big appetite. After eating a little, she put down the tableware. At this time, someone knocked on the door. Wen Liqing turned to open the door, and Feng Ling turned to see Dr. Wen, whom she hadn't seen for a long time. "How is he?" Dr. Wen looked away from Wen Liqing's face and turned to look at Feng Ling, who was sitting by the bed. "I've looked at a few of her radiographic films. She's in good condition. She was just affected by the shock caused by the explosion, and her organs were temporarily displaced for a few seconds, causing severe pain in her internal organs. However, there's no bleeding or internal injuries. She seems to be fine," Wen Liqing said and looked warmly at the man in a white coat in front of her. "Brother, has Nanheng woken up?" Dr. Wen didn't seem to see Wen Liqing's gaze and walked in front of her. When he came to Feng Ling, he looked at her complexion. "It's good that there is no serious injury. When you were in the base, I watched you grow up. It's not easy for you to grow from a skinny 13-year-old to what you are now. It doesn't matter whether you are a man or a woman. The important thing is to live happily and casually. People should at least learn to live for themselves. Feng Ling, have you found your life goal in the past 2 years?" Feng Ling smiled. "Dr. Wen, you sound as if you're already so old." He remembered that Dr. Wen was 2 years older than Wen Liqing. Wen Liqing seemed to be only 25 years old since she graduated, and he was only 27. He said he watched her grow up and treated her like an elder. However, looking at him and Wen Liqing, one was cold and indifferent while the other was gentle and passionate. If the shackles of brother and sister were thrown away, they really seemed to be a good match. And Wen Liqing and Dr. Wen didn't look alike at all. No matter in appearance, temperament or other aspects, they didn't look alike at all. Except that they were both excellent, they were really different. They didn't look like brother and sister at all. I'm 7 years older than you. Am I still young? Dr. Wen asked with a smile. Feng Ling, brother, Nanheng is the same age as you. Are you trying to make him grow up with you so that there will be a generation gap between her and Nanheng? Wen Liqing complained with a chuckle. Dr. Wen ignored Wen Liqing behind him and just looked at Feng Ling. Although there was a kind smile in his eyes, Feng Ling could see the usual elegance and distance in his eyes. He cared about her from the perspective of a very familiar old friend. Dr. Wen, I remember that a long time ago when I was still in the base I was injured once when I was 15 years old. You asked me in the infirmary what kind of life goal I had. At that time my answer was that it was enough to have hot food, a warm house and a bed. Living was my life goal. And my answer is the same now. It has never changed. Chapter 1060. It's a good thing that you haven't changed. At least you're as simple as ever. I don't mean simple here. Dr. Wen pointed to his head and looked at Feng Ling. You're a simple and rational person. You won't think too much about things so you won't be very tired. Dr. Wen was an elegant, calm and transparent person. Although Feng Ling didn't fully understand what he was trying to say to her, she still nodded. I'll go to see your x-ray later. Even if your injury is not serious, you'd better stay here for a few more days to see if there are any other changes. Don't leave in a hurry. Feng Ling nodded. Even if Dr. Wen agreed to let her leave, Han Jin wouldn't let her go. Then take a rest and eat more. Don't eat so little. Dr. Wen gave her a simple reminder and turned to walk out. Wen Liqing followed him and asked softly when she came to the door of the ward, Has Nanheng woken up? Why didn't brother mention Nanheng? Although her voice was very soft, Feng Ling's ears still heard it. She just sat by the bed calmly. Dr. Wen stopped and looked back at the little woman who had tied her long hair into a ponytail behind her. His eyes paused on her face for a second, and then he looked away indifferently, saying, She woke up. She is still lying in the hospital bed. What's there to talk about? Hearing that, Dr. Wen's eyes fell on Gu Chengle's face. Didn't he say he wanted to see Feng Ling? No, he didn't. Wen Liqing immediately stopped talking and just looked at Dr. Wen. Dr. Wen also looked at her again, didn't say anything and left directly. Seeing that he ignored her again, Wen Liqing subconsciously wanted to follow him, but thinking that Feng Ling was still in the ward, she didn't leave but just closed the door. When she looked back, she saw Feng Ling sitting on the bed silently. Although she didn't speak, Feng Ling heard their conversation. Before Li Nanheng fainted, he whispered in her ear with his last consciousness, Remember what you said today. Feng Ling lowered her head, picked up the spoon again, and scooped a mouthful of soup into her mouth. Wen Liqing knew that Feng Ling's hearing was very good. Seeing that she didn't speak, she couldn't guess what she was thinking, so she walked back to sit beside her and watched her somewhat mechanically and numbly send soup and various kinds of food into her mouth. Nanheng must have just woken up. She has been in a coma for a long time and suddenly woke up, but her consciousness hasn't recovered yet. Seeing that Feng Ling didn't speak, Wen Liqing felt strange sitting there alone. The person they had been looking for 2 years was finally found and forcibly brought here by Han Jin. It was impossible for them not to tell Li Nanheng about this, but he had already woken up, but he didn't say he wanted to see Feng Ling. Was Li Nanheng's brain damaged? On the second day after Li Nanheng woke up, Feng Ling obediently rested in the ward and did not go out. She did not hear any order from Li Nanheng to see her. On the third day after Li Nanheng woke up, he didn't see her. On the fourth day after Li Nanheng woke up, he didn't see her. On the fifth day, it was said that many well-informed people from the hospital specially came to visit. It was said that Li Nanheng's ward was very lively today, but she didn't see him either. Feng Ling slept in the ward again and again. When she woke up, it was already afternoon. All of a sudden, Wen Liqing pushed the door open and came in. Feng Ling, someone wants to see you. Feng Ling turned her eyes and saw a couple walking in behind Wen Liqing. They looked somewhat familiar but also somewhat unfamiliar. Behind the couple, a little girl about 6 years old walked in. The little girl's eyes were very bright. After entering the ward, she looked left and right, her face filled with curiosity. Feng Ling tried hard to search for memories of this couple in her mind. When the lady came up excitedly to hold her hand, Feng Ling finally remembered. Mr. Ted and Mrs. Ted? Feng Ling asked curiously. Mrs. Ted immediately looked at her with an agitated expression. She held her hand and said, Mr. Feng? Oh no, Miss Feng. Before this, We didn't expect you to be a girl. Back then you saved our family's lives, especially our daughter. Back then she was still so young. You threw her into the sea and handed her over to the rescue team. Back then I wasn't decisive enough on the cruise and almost caused you to lose your life as well." Feng Ling finally had a more perfect impression of this middle-aged woman in her 30s. She did not expect to meet the mayor of the Foy state, Mr. Ted, and his wife here. Back then, when their family was kidnapped, she did have some recollection of what happened on the cruise to save them. Especially when she fell into the sea and was later rescued by Qiao Fei on an island in the middle of the sea. That was the first time the secret of her gender was discovered, so she had a rather deep impression of this incident. Mr. Ted also walked over. He smiled politely at Feng Ling. "Miss Feng, you Chinese have a saying, the grace of saving a life is unforgettable. Our family is very grateful to you for risking your life to save us. My wife has always held a grudge against you for causing you to fall into the sea. I did not expect to meet you here, nor did I expect that there would be such an impressive girl like you in 11 base. On behalf of our family, I thank you for your kindness. There's no need to be so polite. This is my responsibility for every mission I took in 11 base. It's something I should do." Seeing Mr. Ted suddenly bow to her, Feng Ling immediately stood up. The person before her was a mayor. As a small character, she felt unworthy of such a gesture. Feng Ling was truly embarrassed. She did not know what to do in such a situation. Mrs. Ted continued to hold her hand. "Our family has already moved from Foy State to Los Angeles. My husband's work has also moved from there to Los Angeles. Right now, he is not the mayor of Foy State but the deputy minister of Los Angeles City Hall. Next year he is expected to run for the new mayor of Los Angeles, so we have more interactions with 11 base. When I heard that something happened to Mr. Lee, my husband specially came over to take a look. I did not expect you to be here as well." Back then they had specially gone to 11 base to wait for Feng Ling to thank her in person. However, Feng Ling was injured and hospitalized back then, so she could not see them. It was indeed fate that they met here after 2 years. Although Feng Ling did not know much about the mayor or minister, she knew that Foy State was a small city with almost no reputation in America. It was also a newly established city. Los Angeles was different. To be able to hold such a high position in Los Angeles City Hall and have the qualifications to run for the mayor of Los Angeles, it was clear that Mr. Ted was quite impressive. Chapter 1061. At this moment, the little girl who had been following behind the Mr. and Mrs. Ted approached Mrs. Ted's back. She stood behind Mrs. Ted's leg and carefully peeked her head out to look at Feng Ling. All of a sudden she spoke in slightly stuttering Chinese, "Elder sister, you're so beautiful." Hearing that the little girl had learned Chinese, Feng Ling immediately glanced at the little girl in surprise. She recalled that when she saved her 2 years ago, this child was still very young. Back then she had been screaming and kicking in her arms out of fear. Now she had actually grown up so much. "Miss Feng, we've heard some things about you. We also learned that you haven't completely left 11 base in name. Right now we have a request. We're not sure if you can agree to it." "Please speak." "Because my husband is running for mayor of Los Angeles next year, you should be very clear about the situation and environment in the United States. There are many potential dangers. It's not a big deal for adults like us, but our daughter is too young. I'm afraid that she might encounter kidnappings, extortion threats, and so on. So, during the election year next year, we need to hire a powerful person to be my daughter's personal bodyguard and accompany her every day." At this point, Mrs. Ted looked at Feng Ling with some embarrassment. "Coincidentally, we learned that you're a girl. Although you're a member of 11 base, it seems like you won't be returning for the time being. We also know that you're skilled and have a good character. You've even saved our daughter before, so we wish to hire you to be our daughter's bodyguard." Hearing this, Feng Ling did not immediately respond. She lowered her head to look at the little girl who was currently blinking at her. "Actually, it won't be long. It's almost the end of the year. There are still 9 months until next year's election. As long as you stay by our daughter's side and protect her for 9 months, you'll be able to regain your freedom. When you're by her side, don't worry. We'll definitely give you the best treatment and arrangements. After our family leaves, we'll help you make the decision. We'll talk to the elders of the Lee family and ask them to restore your right to return to 11 base. Everything will naturally take its course. This matter is extremely beneficial to both you and our family. Thus, we hope that Miss Feng can consider it." Feng Ling did not wish to return to 11 base. Even if she was forcefully brought back, she did not feel the need. Mr. and Mrs. Ritter's request seemed to her to offer herself a new choice. Since she was still a member of 11 Base, she could take it as being sent by the base to carry out a mission to protect the minister's daughter, a mission that would last less than a year. However, it seemed that she could no longer stay in Boston. Seeing that Fong Ling did not speak, Mrs. Ted looked at her expectantly. Miss Fong, regarding our request, do you have any other requests? As long as you are willing, we will try our best to satisfy you. No request, I agree. Wen Liqing didn't want to intervene in this matter. After all, it had nothing to do with her, but when she heard Fong Ling agree so readily, she took a look at her and asked softly, "Don't you need to tell Nanheng about this?" It was indeed necessary to inform the person in charge of 11 Base about such matters. However, the Ted couple were still officials of the city hall. They only needed to raise their request. The problem lay in the fact that they respected Fong Ling's wishes and had personally come to ask for her permission. Just because of this, they didn't directly ask the base hall to give her a mission notice. Instead, after learning that she was here, the family of 3 came in person, which was enough to show their respect for her. Faced with such a family, Fong Ling had no reason to reject them. After all, to her it did not matter where she was. As long as they did not force her to return to 11 Base, it did not matter. Nanheng has woken up. I think you'd better tell him? Wen Liqing suddenly paused as soon as she said this. Li Nanheng had indeed been awake for several days. Furthermore, his recovery was not bad. His consciousness was clear and he was not affected in any way. However, he did not mention anything about Fong Ling, nor did he mention that he wanted to see her. It was as though this person had never existed. Several times, when Wen Liqing was in his ward, she vaguely mentioned that Fong Ling was also staying in this hospital. However, Li Nanheng remained expressionless. It was as though he did not hear or feel anything about Fong Ling's name. He only calmly changed the topic and did not respond. "We'll inform Mr. Li right away," Mrs. Ted hurriedly said with a smile. "There's no need. I've already left 11 Base for so long. There's no need to inform anyone. I can directly leave with you," Fong Ling said. "However, if we must go through the proper procedures since this is related to the Los Angeles City Hall, we can just inform the base. We can skip the other procedures." Mrs. Ted and Mrs. Ted nodded. However, they deeply respected Li Nanheng and planned to inform Mr. Li before leaving. However, seeing that Fong Ling did not seem to wish to mention him, they did not say much since they were not clear about the situation. That night, Fong Ling learned that Mr. Ted's family's request had already been approved by 11 Base. Tomorrow morning, she would be able to return to Los Angeles with them. That night, Fong Ling packed up her things. Wen Liqing also helped to call someone to bring her things over to the place she had previously stayed. As she rearranged her things, she glanced at the small velvet box placed in her luggage. She opened it to take a look. Inside was the jade pendant with the word, Fong, engraved on it. She only glanced at it before silently placing it back into the box. She did not take it out again. The next morning, just as Fong Ling was about to leave, she learned that Mr. Ted and Mrs. Ted's car had yet to arrive. While waiting, she walked out of the ward. For some reason, she walked to Li Nanheng's door. Looking at the tightly shut door in front of her, Fong Ling stared at it silently, his words still echoing in her ears. "Remember what you said today." She stood outside the door for a long time until her phone rang. She picked it up and heard the polite voice of the chauffeur sent by Mr. Ted and Mrs. Ted. "Miss Fong, the car has arrived. Please head downstairs." Fong Ling responded and hung up the phone. She turned to return to her own ward to retrieve her luggage. Just as she turned around, suddenly, the door behind her that had been tightly shut all this time opened. The foreshadowing of the plot is basically over. The 9 months in Mr. Ted's house should be over in a few strokes and won't take up too much space. Soon we'll move on to the domestic and high city plots that you want to see. Chapter 1062. The moment the door of the ward opened, Fong Ling saw Dr. Wen coming out. Dr. Wen's gaze landed on her. "Leaving?" Hearing these words, Fong Ling understood. They likely all knew where she was going. Li Nanheng also knew. However, he did not say anything to her, nor did he request to see her. This was also good. At the very least, this was the result she had always wanted. Fong Ling nodded. "And be careful. It's a good thing that you can follow Mr. Ted's family. This experience will be a good stepping stone for you in the future. Furthermore, you'll be able to get closer to the city hall that we rarely get involved with. 11 Base will no longer have any reason to look down on you. Of course, 11 Base has never looked down on you. Back then, it was only the stubbornness of those elders that led to this outcome. You should know that everyone likes you very much. Thank you." Fong Ling did not speak more. She glanced at the open door behind him. This room was very large. From the angle of the door she could not see the bed, nor could she see that person. She directly turned to leave. She returned to the room to retrieve her luggage and then left the hospital. Mr. Ted's family indeed treated Feng Ling very well. Rather than saying that they had invited her back as a bodyguard, it was more accurate to say that they had invited a distinguished guest. Regardless of whether it was in terms of treatment or other aspects, it was even better than that of a wealthy family's young miss. However, Feng Ling was clear about her responsibilities. She would accept things that she should accept and avoid things that she shouldn't enjoy. Every day she would strictly protect the couple's daughter. She was responsible for sending her to school, attending various classes, and watching over her when she returned home. Any dangerous situations would not escape her eyes. She protected the little girl very well. Mr. Ted's family trusted Feng Ling more and more, and their relationship grew closer. Often, when they attended large banquets, Feng Ling was only supposed to be a bodyguard in secret. However, they insisted on bringing her along and had her dress up simply. However, Feng Ling refused to wear gowns, so they prepared several neutral suits for her to wear. Every time she wore those suits to attend a banquet with Mr. Ted's family, the couple's daughter would hold her hand and say, "Sister Feng Ling, you're so handsome and beautiful. If you could grow your hair long, you'd definitely be as beautiful as a princess." Feng Ling was often amused by the little girl. Ever since Feng Ling became a bodyguard at the Ted couple's home, she had not contacted those people, including Li Nanheng. She had not received any news from him, and he had not barged into her life without permission. Even when they occasionally met at a banquet, they would only brush past each other. When the couple took the initiative to greet Li Nanheng, Feng Ling would only stand behind them silently. She did not meet Li Nanheng's gaze. Li Nanheng also did not call out her name. It was as though the two of them had instantly turned into familiar strangers. Even when they brushed past each other, they would not pause for a single second for the other. 9 months passed in the blink of an eye. In these 9 months, just as the couple had said, there were indeed people secretly trying to find loopholes in their daughter. However, the little girl followed Feng Ling every day and did not encounter any danger. Feng Ling's sharp senses made it impossible for those people to find any loopholes. Even when the couple's daughter was in class, Feng Ling would stand in the corridor outside the classroom. She would not give those people any leeway. 9 months had just passed and the election had begun. Mr. Ted had obtained the number of votes he had. However, the position of mayor had been secured by another person. Mr. Ted had become the deputy mayor of Los Angeles. Los Angeles was an important city in the United States. As long as the deputy mayor's position was stable, he would be a person above others. This result was also good. She did not wish for the highest position but for the most stable one. Under the request of Mr. Ted's family, Feng Ling continued to protect their daughter for another month. Only after everything had stabilized did they no longer try to stop Feng Ling from leaving. Of course, if Feng Ling was willing to continue staying at their home, they would be more than happy. After all, their daughter was already very reliant on Feng Ling. Every day she would follow Feng Ling everywhere. Feng Ling would also occasionally teach the little girl some self-defense skills. They only had one daughter, and they had only given birth at an advanced age. They felt that their child would have one less playmate and one less older sister. They often offered to accept Feng Ling as their goddaughter, but were all rejected by Feng Ling. She did not have any parents in this world and had many fewer worries. Even though it was possible for people to develop deep feelings for each other, she did not wish to bring too many worries to herself. Just as Feng Ling was preparing to leave the Ted couple's home, the couple suddenly handed her a document. On the document was a recommendation letter that the couple had written to the 11 base. The letter clearly listed all of Feng Ling's contributions to their family, as well as the various achievements she had made while on missions at 11 base, as well as the fact that she had risked her life to save their family. This was a recommendation letter for her to return to 11 base and be promoted to an instructor. Feng Ling had once said that she would no longer return to 11 base as a member. Yet, the Ted couple had actually recommended her to be an instructor. Even though she had passed all the training at the base and was often at the same standard as the instructors, coming in first in every test, and had almost completed everything she needed to learn in the sniper team, she was clearly not qualified to be a member of the team, regardless of whether it was her age or qualifications. But if this recommendation letter was personally written by the deputy mayor of Los Angeles, then it would be a different story. Feng Ling knew that the Ted couple was trying to help her. However, she did not really want this help. To her, if the Ted couple were to request 11 base to send her to Africa or somewhere even further, it would be best if she never returned. However, this recommendation letter had already been written. Furthermore, she had only received a copy. The document had already been sent to 11 base 2 days ago. It was too late to retrieve it now. Right now, Feng Ling was not too sure if there had been any changes to the management of 11 base. However, she felt that with the elders of the Li family around, there was no way she would be able to return. Furthermore, with her identity as an instructor, wasn't this a slap to those elders' faces? However, she did not expect that the base would actually accept Mr. Ted's recommendation and hire her to be an intern instructor at the shooting range. Please remember this book's domain name. For mobile version website, M. Chapter 1063. Nearly 3 years ago, she was once an unwanted member of 11 base, lying on the ground and being watched by everyone. She had to leave in embarrassment. But now, she was going to take the invitation letter from 11 base and invite her back to be a drill master. Feng Ling didn't know how to react until Ah Feng and Xiao Su came to pick her up on behalf of 11 base. Feng Ling looked at Xiao Su and Ah Feng and asked the question in her heart, "Didn't you not accept women?" "It's elderly who doesn't accept women, not 11 base," Ah Feng said. "Besides, there is a loophole in the rules and regulations of the base. They don't allow women to be trained, but it doesn't say that they don't allow women to spoil them. So, Drillmaster Feng, please get in the car." Feng Ling, who found this loophole? Who took advantage of this loophole to take her back so openly? Except for Li Nanheng, she couldn't think of a second person, and it was impossible for a second person to have such great ability to bring her back like this. When she left, she had lost all her face, but now it seemed that she had regained it all. Even if she returned to 11 base now, no one would dare to say a word of objection. But Li Nanheng hadn't contacted her for a long time. Even after such a long time, every time they met, they just brushed past each other. Even if they occasionally looked at each other, that man's eyes were only cold and indifferent, without any extra feelings, as if he was just a stranger. "You go back first. If I want to go back to the base, I will go back by myself." Feng Ling didn't get in the car. Ah Feng and Xiao Su looked at her in confusion. "The base sent a car to invite you back. Don't you understand the current situation? They are helping you find what you lost on the day you left." What did she lose? Her pride? However, for Feng Ling, she had already left 11 base for more than 2 years. It had already been nearly 3 years. If she continued to stay outside like this, she could walk any path she wanted. There was no need for her to only have 11 base in her eyes. But if she went back in their car now, her world would return to its original state. This original state was the most peaceful and happy place in her world, and it was also the way of life she used to insist on. As long as she could live well in the base, it was her goal in life. Later, Dr. Wen asked her about her goal in life, and she said that she just wanted to live well. But now, she didn't want to be tied to 11 base. Even if he wanted to go back, now was not the time. "There's no need for that. I'll pick up my lost pride myself. I don't need anyone to help me." Ah Feng frowned, and Xiao Su looked at Feng Ling in confusion. "You should be able to tell who arranged this for you. There's only one person who can make you go back like this." Feng Ling did not answer. She handed the letter to Ah Feng and turned to walk back. She did not get in the car, nor did she intend to leave now. Xiao Su looked at the employment letter in Ah Feng's hand and then at Ah Feng. "She's refusing? It's an obvious rejection." Ah Feng sighed softly. The elders did go too far. After all, she has made countless contributions to the base, and she is still a young girl. No matter how generous she is, I'm afraid there will be a knot in her heart. This knot has nothing to do with dignity or face, but the barrier in her heart. Hasn't Boss Lee been trying to help her overcome this hurdle? The problem is that she won't accept it. Before coming, Boss didn't say anything. I think Boss Lee understands her temper the best and knows that she won't accept it. That's right, Boss should have guessed it. Mr. and Mrs. Ted's daughter could not bear for Feng Ling to leave. Ever since she heard that Feng Ling was about to leave, the little girl would hug Feng Ling and cry for a while every day. Humans were sentimental creatures, especially towards innocent children. Even someone as decisive as Feng Ling could not bear to part with her. After dragging on like this for a week, she finally had to leave. The little girl hugged her and cried loudly again. Feng Ling coaxed her and said that she would come here often to visit her in the future. After giving her a promise, the little girl tugged at the corner of her clothes and walked out while crying. After leaving the Ted couple's home, Feng Ling was looking for a place to stay. She did not plan on returning to 11 base. She thanked the Ted couple for sending her a car and went out to hail a taxi. She stood by the roadside and looked at her phone while waiting for a taxi. All of a sudden, a white Ferrari stopped in front of her. Feng Ling raised her head. The car window rolled down and Qin Siding's face appeared before her eyes. 20 minutes later, Feng Ling and Qin Siding sat down at a nearby coffee shop. Feng Ling's heart was filled with respect for people like Dr. Qin and Dr. Wen who fought against the King of Hell with a scalpel. Furthermore, Qin Siding had saved her life before, so she was especially respectful towards him. I've heard a little about your matter. Qin Siding placed a cup of coffee with sugar and milk in front of her. Are you used to this kind of coffee? Feng Ling nodded. I'm fine with anything. I'm not that picky. Qin Siding smiled. When the waiter brought up another cup of Americano, Feng Ling looked at the black Americano bitter coffee in front of him and immediately placed the coffee with sugar and milk in front of her closest to her. Watching her actions, Qin Siding discovered that although she appeared calm and emotionless, she was actually a little cute deep down. However, this cuteness of hers could only be discovered by those who were willing to discover it. For example, Li Nanheng. Qin Siding took a sip of coffee and said, "If you don't want to go back to the base for the time being and want to do something outside, I have a job for you, but it might be a little far from America." What job? Recently, Mr. Mo's wife needs a trustworthy bodyguard. You know the relationship between Mr. Mo and 11 Base. His wife is a very good person. Even if you become a bodyguard, your treatment will not be worse than that of the city hall. In this way you will have a reliable job, and Mr. Mo will have a reliable and trustworthy person like you. You can also temporarily leave Los Angeles, which makes you unhappy. You can kill 3 birds with 1 stone. Do you want to consider it? Please remember the domain name of this book. For mobile version website, M. Chapter 1064. Mr. Mo's wife? Feng Ling looked at him. Is she the person you said saved Mr. Mo's life last time? It's her. Her name is Jin Wan. She is the daughter of High City's G Group and Mo Jingshan's wife. Qin Siding smiled. When Mo Jingshan had an accident in Los Angeles, you were still training in the base, but the accident was very serious. Nanheng was also injured, but his injury was not as serious as Mo Jingshan's. He went back to the base alone to recuperate. I guess you don't know what happened at that time. A few years ago, Feng Ling was still young and lived peacefully in the base, so she didn't pay much attention to it. However, she had certainly heard of Mr. Mo's name. Although he had never appeared in the base, he was a godlike existence in the mouths of many people in the base. Feng Ling knew that Mr. Mo was a person who was highly valued and respected by 11 Base, and she heard that his hands were never stained with blood. He only occasionally acted as the think tank of 11 Base, but he was clear-headed and decisive. As long as Mr. Mo took action, no one could defeat him. Even Li Nanheng had some respect for Mo Jingshan, this so-called brother. They had always been brothers who would help each other as long as they told each other what they needed. For a man like Mr. Mo, the wife he loved the most would definitely be a good woman. High City, is it far from here? It's in China. It's across half the world. Do you think it's far? Feng Ling looked at Qin Siding. Why me? Before I came to the United States, Mo Jingshan happened to be looking for a good bodyguard. I know this. After I came here and heard about you, I thought you might not be willing to return to 11 Base, but we can't let you go to a place where we can't find you. Then why don't you be Mrs. Mo's bodyguard? No matter in martial arts or other aspects, you are absolutely trustworthy. Feng Ling didn't speak for a while. Qin Siding looked at her. Do you want to do it? Even if I want to go, will 11 Base let me go? Feng Ling threw the question back to him. You are now a drill master hired by 11 Base. Nominally, you are still connected to 11 Base, so in fact there are many things you can't do. If you want to go to High City, you may need Li Nanheng's consent and signature. Without his signature, it will be difficult for you to leave the United States. Feng Ling paused. You want his signature? Of course. Qin Siding said calmly, 11 Base is not a simple place in America. Previously, when you went to work as a bodyguard for Mr. and Mrs. Ted, they were from the city hall. All they needed was a document to hire you. However, this time, you took the initiative to go out, so you needed the approval and signature of the person in charge of the base. Feng Ling didn't want to go back to Li Nanheng at all. She didn't even want to have anything to do with him in the future. But she didn't expect that the opportunity to leave the United States and go to China to take a look at the bustling high city was actually in Li Nanheng's hands. Is there no other way? No, your name is on 11 Base. Without special permission you can't leave the country. You can't pass the customs. Feng Ling looked at the coffee in front of her and gently rubbed the cup with her fingers. I understand. A few days ago the person who refused to return to 11 base suddenly appeared in 11 base. This news really confused the brothers. Most importantly, when Feng Ling, who had left the base for 2 days, finally walked into the gate of 11 base again, she just looked ahead and walked toward the base hall. She didn't seem to be nostalgic at all, nor did she look around. Instead, the brothers who passed by and saw her spread the news among themselves, saying that Feng Ling had returned. Feng Ling went to the base hall. Seeing her return, Feng Feng's eyes lit up. You've thought it through and are willing to come back? At that time we specially drove to pick you up but you refused to go back. How did you come back? Did you drive yourself or… Feng, if I want to leave the country must I get the signature of the person in charge of the base? Feng Ling asked directly. Feng's expression paused for a moment. He looked at her. Leave the country? Where are you going? China, High City. What are you going to do in High City? I haven't heard that you have any relatives or friends in High City? Feng paused. Feng Ling was an orphan. How could she have relatives? She had never been to China, let alone friends there. Mr. Mo's wife needs a bodyguard. They think I'm suitable. I also think I can go to High City to have a look, Feng Ling said calmly. If I ask you to sign for me and allow me to leave the United States, can I? Mr. Mo's wife. I do know that Mr. Mo plans to choose a person to protect Mrs. Mo in 11 base, but he hasn't decided on the person. How do you know this news? I met Dr. Qin. Dr. Qin rarely intervened in other people's affairs, unless Mr. Mo personally asked Feng Ling to go over, or unless Boss Li also knew about this matter, Dr. Qin would not casually intervene. Then Feng was not sure about this matter. The members of the base have to follow the rules when they walk in the United States. If you want to leave the country, especially now that you are an intern drill master of 11 base, if you want to leave the country you have to get Boss Li's signature. Apart from him, is there any other way? No, even Mr. Li can't do it. Feng Ling didn't speak, looked at Feng for a while and turned to walk out. Hey Feng Ling, where are you going? Seeing her fierce back, Feng hurriedly chased after her and asked in a low voice. I'm going to find Li Nanheng. Feng Ling didn't look back. Do you know where to find him? Feng Ling paused and looked at the familiar 11 base outside. She had been away for more than 2 years, but nothing seemed to have changed. All the training grounds, all the team camps, everything was still the same. But it seemed that there were some changes, such as the transfer of personnel. So many people's residences must have been changed. At this time, Feng Ling suddenly looked at the square in front of the base hall, looking at the ground where she had once lied miserably before leaving. Everything that had happened back then was still vivid in her mind. When she was about to turn around and ask Feng a few more questions at this time, several brothers who used to be friends with her came in to take something. Suddenly seeing Feng Ling, they looked at her excitedly and joked, "Hello, Drill Master Feng." The corner of Feng Ling's mouth twitched, but she turned to see Feng with a kind smile on his face, obviously welcoming her return. Please remember this book's domain name. For mobile version website, M. Chapter 1065. The other 4 members of the sniper team have been arranged to live in another building, and the training camp has also been moved there. Boss Li still lives in the same place, but you may not be able to find him at this time. Why? He's not at the base? Feng nodded. Grandfather Li is old. He was hospitalized due to a stroke and almost died. Fortunately he was saved. Recently he has been lying in bed to recuperate. Boss Li hasn't returned to the Li family in the past 2 or 3 years, but now the pillar of the Li family is about to collapse. No matter how angry Boss is, he has to go back to take a look. When will he come back? I'll wait for him. I'm not sure. Why don't you sit here and wait? No. Tell me where the sniper team is. I'll go and have a look. Feng smiled. Aren't you afraid that if Kay and the others see you, they will tie you up in the training camp and never let you out again? Feng Ling's eyes were calm. They don't have the guts. Feng raised his eyebrows. That's right. If it were in the past, perhaps those boys would do such a thing, but after all, they all knew that Feng Ling was a woman and Boss Li, who dared to touch her. It was simply suicidal. After all, she hadn't been back for 2 years. Those familiar and unfamiliar places flashed before her eyes one by one. Feng Ling thought that her heart wouldn't waver, but in fact, when she walked to the training camp of the sniper team, the places she passed by all made her heart flutter slightly. Especially those little boys who used to call her Master Feng Ling in the past 3 years. had transformed into young men and were seriously training in the training camp of Team 4. Feng Ling was in the training camp of Team 4. When she passed by the training camp of Team 4, she glanced inside and didn't disturb them. She went around to the front and continued walking. Right now, the training camp of the sniper team was located in the largest training ground in the south of the base. It was originally a special training place for the elite team, but now it was said that the elite team had set up a special training camp outside the base, which was many times better than the facilities here. In this way, 11 Base should have expanded a lot, set up a lot of training camps and recruited a lot of people. This situation put a lot of pressure on the military, but no matter how dissatisfied the military was, they could not easily compete with 11 Base. In the sniper team's camp, the 4 members were currently proficiently picking up the large sniper rifles that they couldn't even hold properly in the beginning. Even and steady gunshots rang out one after another. Feng Ling stood outside and watched the backs of the 4 people training. She looked at the sniper rifles in their hands and did not speak. She did not go in to disturb them, but for some reason she felt her hands itching. Even if she did not want to come back to be a drill master, she missed these sniper rifles very much. Watching them training here, she actually had an urge to go in and pick up a gun to try it out. Feng Ling suppressed this impulse and did nothing. She just looked at the 4 people inside. Tam was the first to notice Feng Ling. He originally turned back to call the instructor over to help him reload the bullets, but when he turned back he suddenly saw someone from the corner of his eye. He abruptly turned his eyes to see Feng Ling standing outside the training camp and staring at them without blinking. Feng Ling. Tam thought he had seen wrongly and cried out in surprise. Kay and the others were all holding their guns and preparing to shoot again. When they heard Tam's voice, they hurriedly turned to look at him, followed his gaze and turned to look at Feng Ling. Everyone's eyes were filled with surprise, and the surprise was instantly dyed with joy. Feng Ling? It's really Feng Ling? Oh my god, Feng Ling is back. Feng Ling did not want to disturb them, but she did not expect to be discovered so quickly. She did not want to interact with the other people in the base, nor could she be bothered to exchange pleasantries. However, facing the 4 people in the sniper team, she was still willing to interact with them. She smiled faintly at them. Since she had been discovered, she no longer hid and walked in. She had only taken a few steps when Lin Cheng and Lei Peng rushed forward and lifted her up. Tam did not care whether Feng Ling was a woman or a man. He also came over and lifted Feng Ling over his head, excitedly throwing her up. The few of them shouted loudly and threw Feng Ling up a few more times until Feng Ling cried out in a low voice, "Put me down, quickly put me down." Only then did the 3 of them put her down, laughing. Feng Ling was not used to their enthusiasm. She took a step back, only to see that the 3 of them were staring at her as though she was an alien. She was wearing a set of light women's sportswear. It was black, the same color as the uniform they were wearing, but it was clearly very different from before. At least the outline of her chest was no longer deliberately concealed. At least her once pitifully short hair, although it was still short, at least it was longer than the length of her ears, making her look much gentler. Kay stood by the side, holding the sniper rifle in his hand against the ground. Watching Feng Ling being raised up high and thrown down by the 3 of them, he smiled. "Feng Ling, I heard that this time you came back, you were directly hired by our base as an intern instructor of the shooting range, right? Beautiful. This is really a slap in the face to those elders, Lee. You came back in style, it really makes me happy to hear it." Tam's eyes shone as he spoke. As he spoke, he looked at Feng Ling's face and couldn't help but turn his head to Lei Peng's ear to say, "After this Feng Ling became a woman, no matter how I look at him, I feel that he is beautiful. Back then we hung out together every day. Do you think there's something wrong with my eyes? I actually couldn't tell that he was actually a girl." Lei Peng sneered, "You only King think about guns. When have you ever thought about girls? You speak as though you saw through it back then. It's mainly because we were too familiar with each other. I always thought that Feng Ling was just a slightly petite brother. How could I think so much? Right, Kay, back then when you were so close to her, you also didn't realize it, right?" Lei Peng turned to look at Kay. Kay raised his eyebrows and looked at Feng Ling. "Then we really have to settle the score with Feng Ling. After being deceived for so long, she still provoked us and hurt us before leaving. In the past 2 years, how much effort did we put in to find her? But she didn't come back after receiving the employment letter. She came back so late after so many days. I wonder what she was doing. Didn't you always say that 11 Base is your home? Now you can go home with your head held high. Do you not want to go back?" Chapter 1066. The reason Kay asked this was because 9 months ago in the Boston jungle, He saw Feng Ling's ruthlessness and decisiveness, and her rejection of Li Nanheng and 11 base. He had been worried that Feng Ling might not come back. After waiting for so long, she finally came back, but he instinctively felt that things wouldn't be so simple. At least, with Feng Ling's personality, she wouldn't agree to come back so easily. Yeah, the news of you being hired as an intern instructor has spread throughout the base. All the brothers who have dealt with you before and don't hate you are happy for you. Only those people from Team 3 who always oppose me feel like they have been slapped in the face. Their faces are all dark. The few of us feel really good when we see them. We've been waiting for you to come back all this time. Lin Qing said as he stepped forward to hold Feng Ling's wrist. Come. You haven't held a sniper rifle in 2 or 3 years, right? Come and try it. Let's see how Feng Ling's marksmanship is now. Has it deteriorated? How could it have deteriorated? You don't know that 9 months ago in the Boston jungle, Feng Ling faced more than a dozen people alone, but she wasn't afraid at all. If it weren't for the sudden explosion from above, she would have killed more than a dozen people by herself. Kay said as he looked in Feng Ling's direction expectantly. In the past 3 years we've almost caught up to you. Feng Ling really missed the sniper rifle. Lin Qing dragged her over and she didn't refuse. Originally, Tam thought that he was just borrowing their sniper rifle to play with, but when he received the signal from Lin Qing and the others, he immediately turned to the weapon rack by the side, took out a new sniper rifle from it, and quickly walked over to hand it to Feng Ling. Feng Ling looked at the sniper rifle in her hand, then lowered her eyes, and saw her name written on the nameplate below. She raised her eyes and looked at Lin Qing in confusion. This is the sniper rifle that the base custom made for each of us when our sniper team moved to the new training camp. You have one too. Everything that you should have, not a single one was left behind. Lin Qing said, you've always been a member of our sniper team. You've never left. Back then, boss said that you only accepted a temporary assignment and temporarily left the base, but everything that belongs to you still exists. 11 base has always been waiting for you to come back, and we have always been waiting for you to come back. Feng Ling held the gun in her hand and looked at the target silently. She stood there for a long time without moving. All right, let's not talk about this anymore. Try out your new gun, Lin Qing said as he and the others took a step back. Feng Ling raised the sniper rifle in her hand and aimed at the target 100 meters ahead. With a ping sound, she fired and prepared to hit the bullseye. The other 4 knew that her strength was not limited to this. Even though she had not held a sniper rifle for a long time, she was definitely not out of practice. Then Feng Ling turned the gun 45 degrees and fired at the target 300 meters away. Once again she hit the bullseye. At this moment applause rang out from all around. Then, everyone looked forward to her next move. Feng Ling aimed the gun at the center of the target that was 500 meters away. I heard that when Feng Ling left the base she could already hit the target 500 meters away. However, I heard that she only tried it a few times on her own and never did it in front of us. Now that so long has passed, I wonder if she can still do it. She can definitely do it. Before their voices fell, another gunshot rang out in the air. Feng Ling still held the gun in her hand and watched the bullet fly to a position 500 meters away in a short period of time. It suddenly passed through the center of the red circle. Not to mention the other 4 people, even the drill master who saw Feng Ling came back and didn't intend to disturb them for the time being was surprised. He looked at the bullseye and then at Feng Ling who was holding the sniper rifle calmly. He swallowed the tea in his mouth and then secretly thought in his heart, no wonder Feng Ling was invited back to the base as an intern drill master. For someone like her who hadn't touched a sniper rifle for 2 to 3 years, this kind of perfect accuracy, even he might not be able to have this kind of calmness and confidence. No matter what title 11 base gave her, she deserved it. Feng Ling put down the gun and looked back at them. You guys continue to practice. I won't disturb your training process. It's not a bother. Originally, you should have a part in these training processes, but now that you are an instructor, you really can't train with us anymore, right? Lei Peng asked as he helped her pick up the gun. Feng Ling didn't explain but only said, I haven't eaten the food in the base's cafeteria for a long time. Let's go eat together tonight when we have time. Will you stay at the base today? Will you stay? When Tam heard this, he immediately leaned over excitedly. Where do you want to stay? The original residence or the new place for us brothers to live? No, you're a girl now. You can't live with us, right? The base should have specially arranged a separate residence for you because of your gender. Have you asked Da Feng and arranged a place for you to live? There were so many questions and Feng Ling couldn't answer them all. She looked at Tam and thought for a moment before saying, not yet. She didn't say that she would stay, but she didn't know when Li Nanheng would come back. Maybe he wouldn't come back tonight. She was already in 11 base now and there was no need to go out and live outside. Right now, the most important thing to do was to wait for Li Nanheng to come back and quickly ask him to sign a permit for her so that she could go to High City smoothly. Now that she suddenly came back, I guess the base hasn't prepared anything immediately. Maybe she will go back to her previous place to live? They stood there and directly discussed. It can't be. It's no longer suitable for Feng Ling to live in the same building as anyone in the base. Why not? She used to live next door to Boss Li. Boss's room has never been changed, and her room is cleaned every day. It's always clean. She can just bring a new quilt in. Why is it so troublesome? And it's only natural for her to live next door to Boss, right? Kay listened and did not speak. He recalled the scene he saw about Feng Ling and Boss Li in the jungle, and then remembered that Feng Ling didn't seem to have any interaction with Boss Li in the past few months after returning to Los Angeles. He immediately turned his gaze to her face as if trying to see what she was thinking. Chapter 1067. With the excuse that Ah Feng still had something to discuss with her, Feng Ling withdrew from the overly enthusiastic sniper team training camp. Otherwise, the four of them would have chatted with her for 3 days and 3 nights. Ah Feng was indeed looking for her. When Feng Ling returned to the base hall, Ah Feng asked her, "I don't know if Boss Li can come back today. Do you want to stay in the base today? Recently there are a lot of things going on in the Li family. We don't want to disturb Boss, so we didn't call him to ask when he would come back. Now that the old man is seriously ill, we can't rush him." Feng Ling said, "Then I'll stay here first." "Do you have to go? Since you're back to the base, I think you might as well take the employment letter and go to the shooting range to be a drill master." "No, I'll just stay here and wait for Li Nanheng to come back to sign the contract." Seeing that Feng Ling didn't waver at all, Ah Feng didn't say more. "All right, I'll ask someone to send you to your place." Feng Ling thought that they had arranged a single room for her, so she nodded and didn't say more. Ah Feng sent someone to take her to her place to rest, but when she walked from the base hall to the so-called residence, she felt that this road was very familiar. Until the building she used to live in appeared in front of her, until that person brought her up to the floor she used to live in, and then brought her to the room she used to live in. When he went up to help her open the door, she looked at the bright room and the clean bed. She stood there for a long time without moving. "Miss Feng," Ah Feng said that you can go back to live here first. There is no other place for you, so you can live here first. Feng Ling stood outside the door and turned to look at the door next door. The days when she lived next door with Li Nanheng were still vivid in her mind. The man in front of her was only sent by Ah Feng, so he didn't have much to say. Feng Ling didn't say much and walked in. The man left. After he left, Feng Ling stood in this familiar room and called Ah Feng. "Help me arrange another room to live in. I don't want to live here." "Why? Haven't you always lived there?" "It has always been very comfortable. I thought it would be more convenient for you to live there now." "There's no need. Doesn't 11 base also have special guest rooms? Just find me a normal guest room." Feng Ling held the phone and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. She opened the windows and looked out. It was all familiar. Guest room? Feng Ling's words were very clear. Although she was now in 11 base, she had no intention of coming back. "All right, come over later. I'll get you the key to the guest room. There are a few guest rooms upstairs in the base hall. You can stay there first." "Thanks." Feng Ling hung up. Before she left, she saw the balcony outside the window and walked out. At the same time, she turned to look at the neighboring balcony and the room on the balcony. He stood there silently for a while, then withdrew his gaze and walked back to the window. When he walked out of the door, he didn't say anything about the furnishings in the room that hadn't changed in the past 2 or 3 years. He just walked out. On the first night in the guest room of the base, Feng Ling couldn't sleep. When she woke up the next day, she went to the base cafeteria to eat. Several familiar brothers came to talk to her, but she just sat there listlessly and occasionally responded perfunctorily. Then the rumor that Feng Ling has now become a drill master and has become more arrogant spread throughout the base within a few hours. Those who liked her didn't take it seriously, and those who didn't like her criticized her behind her back. Feng Ling didn't bother to pay attention to them. After eating, she went back to sleep and didn't contact anyone. Even the 4 members of the sniper team came to visit her during the training break. She continued to sleep and closed the door. After waiting for 2 whole days, Li Nanheng didn't come back. Ah Feng said that he had called the Li family. Grandfather Li's condition was not very good. Li Nanheng was the only grandson of the Li family and couldn't leave at this time. This made Feng Ling suddenly have a feeling that waiting for Li Nanheng was going to take forever. But now her work at the Tet couple's home had ended. She still needed Li Nanheng's signature to go to High City as she promised Dr. Qin. She didn't take over the drill master's job at 11 base. It was really boring to stay in the guest room every day. On the third day after returning to 11 base, Feng Ling finally couldn't stand it anymore. She followed the familiar gunshots and went to the sniper team. At first, she only sat with the drill master of the sniper team to drink tea and chat. Later, she directly trained with the other 4 members and regained some of the feeling in 11 base. On the evening of the third day, Feng Ling trained with the other 4 members of the sniper team for a day. She was a little tired and was about to go back to rest when Ah Feng suddenly called her. Feng Ling, Boss Li is back. Hearing this news, Feng Ling didn't even give herself time to go back to change and take a shower. She directly went to the base hall. However, when she arrived at the hall, she didn't see Li Nanheng. Grandfather Li's condition has temporarily stabilized. In the next 2 days, the military will come to the base to discuss in detail. Boss Li will only come back today, but he didn't come to the hall. He should have directly returned to his residence or is inspecting another camp. I haven't called him yet. Feng Ling, are you in a hurry? Feng Ling, how could she not be in a hurry? She had been waiting here for 3 days. But even though she waited, she really realized that Li Nanheng had returned. She recalled that since they parted in the jungle in Boston, the number of times she met Li Nanheng could be counted with 3 fingers. However, in the past 9 months, even if they met, they would only brush past each other. She didn't speak and he would also pass by indifferently. His completely unfamiliar attitude made it difficult for her to figure out what he was thinking. Mr. Mo wanted to choose a capable person from 11 base to be his bodyguard. Ah Feng knew this, so Li Nanheng must also know this. If she really didn't know how to ask Li Nanheng, should she just write a document first and then bring it to him for his signature? After returning to her room, Feng Ling turned on the laptop and wrote a document. Then she asked someone to print out 2 copies and went to Li Nanheng's residence with the documents. When she walked downstairs, she glanced up and saw that the light in Li Nanheng's room was on. She walked over quickly and approached with the documents that needed his signature. Before she went upstairs, she suddenly saw that the light in the room went out. Feng Ling paused and glanced at the time. It was only 9:30 in the evening. Was he asleep? Chapter 1068. Feng Ling stood downstairs of Li Nanheng's residence and looked at the window with the light turned off. She stood there for a long time to make sure that the light was not turned on again. After confirming that he was really asleep, she turned around with the documents in her hand. However, she still didn't believe that he could sleep so early. As she walked, she looked back. It was dark in the room. Was it because he didn't sleep well at home because of Grandfather Li? Did he want to rest early after returning to the base today? It was so late. It didn't seem necessary for her to knock on his door now. Even if she got the signature now, she couldn't leave the base overnight. She had to wait until tomorrow morning. Besides, it was not easy to knock on his door. Every time she entered his room, she would suffer a lot before she could leave. Feng Ling didn't go but went back to the guest room upstairs in the base hall. The next morning, she woke up very early and wanted to go to his place to wait for him. However, when she arrived, the 2 men passing by outside the door saw her and asked excitedly, "Feng Ling, are you here to look for boss?" So now everyone knew that Li Nanheng and she had feelings for each other. Feng Ling answered, "Yes, I have something to talk to him about." Boss woke up early. I saw him go to the base cafeteria half an hour ago. He didn't seem to eat anything last night. He should have gone to eat breakfast early today. There are people from the military coming over in the afternoon. Boss has been busy recently. I see. Thank you. Feng Ling nodded and turned to walk to the base canteen. It was only 6 o'clock in the morning. He went downstairs half an hour ago. Did he sleep early last night? Feng Ling was confused but didn't think much. She went to the canteen and thought that she could find him, but she looked around the canteen and didn't see Li Nanheng. Did you see Boss Li? After looking for a long time, Feng Ling stopped a man who had just finished eating and asked. Boss Li, he just had breakfast here and left. Where did he go? I don't know. Unlike us, Boss Li can only go to the fixed training ground every day. Boss goes to Team 1, the sniper team, and Team 4 to see the newcomers. After a while, he has a meeting with Ah Feng and the others. He also has military affairs. I don't know where he is now. Feng Ling once again held the document in her hand and stood rooted to the ground. A moment later, she picked up her cell phone expressionlessly and called Li Nanheng. The phone was turned off. Very good. Was he really so busy that he couldn't see his tail, or was he deliberately ignoring her and not seeing her? But thinking about it carefully, he hadn't looked for her in the past 9 months. How could he have deliberately left her hanging? 11 base was not small. Not every member could easily meet someone of Li Nanheng's status. She used to see him often, but that was because he wanted her to. It wasn't that Feng Ling didn't know this. But she wasn't looking for him right now. She just wanted his signature. Looking at the people in the cafeteria who were looking at her curiously, Feng Ling turned around and walked out with a dark expression. 11 base was so big. She was likely to go to Team 1, but he was in another team. She went to another team, but he went to another team. She couldn't find him at all. She simply went to a certain road in the base and found a stone puppet to sit on. She swore that as long as Li Nanheng signed the document to let her go to High City, she would immediately leave 11 base and never look for him again. Absolutely yes, no, she would. Then Feng Ling sat on the stone puppet on this road for 2 hours, but Li Nanheng still didn't pass by. She called him again, but his phone was still turned off. Feng Ling sat there holding the document in her hand. Her patience was almost exhausted, and she thought hopelessly she'd better go to his place. He had something to discuss with the people from the military in the afternoon. The weather was so hot. A person like him who was obsessed with cleanliness should come back to take a shower and change his clothes after finishing his work in the morning. In fact, the news that Feng Ling had returned to the base had long been spread in the base. Even if Li Nanheng was not in the base 2 days ago, his subordinates were all well informed and observant. How could they not know that someone was waiting for him in the base? Li Nanheng came back from Team 4 and went directly to the base hall. Ah Feng was having a meeting with several other people in the hall. Seeing boss come, he stood up. Boss. Xiao Su also came in to submit something at this time. Seeing Li Nanheng come in, he suddenly asked suspiciously, Feng Ling has been looking for you. Have you seen her? Li Nanheng picked up the teacup and took a sip, saying lightly, looking for me? Seeing his expression as if he didn't know, Xiao Su coughed. It seems that she hasn't seen you yet. Li Nanheng didn't answer, nor did he respond to this matter. He went straight to business with Ah Feng, but Xiao Su didn't give up. As soon as they were idle, he interrupted and finally told them that Feng Ling wanted to go to High City to be Mrs. Mo's bodyguard and wanted boss's signature to let her go. Then he just stood there waiting to see boss's expression. Boss, did Mr. Mo inform you that Feng Ling is going to High City? Have you received the news? Ah Feng asked. Boss, did Mr. Mo inform you that Feng Ling is going to High City? Li Nanheng didn't take this topic seriously and didn't say anything. Since he came back from Boston with serious injuries, Li Nanheng had never mentioned Feng Ling's name or asked anything about her. Now he also didn't mention anything about her. If you really don't want to care about Feng Ling anymore, boss, can you give me a temporary privilege? I'll sign for her and let her go wherever she wants, Ah Feng said again. Li Nanheng glanced at him coldly. Do you have nothing better to do? Why do I have nothing better to do? Do you dare to say that you're not giving her the cold shoulder? After all, she was so embarrassed when she left. Now that she can stand in the base again, you still let her wait for you in the base for several days. Tell me you've been helping her prepare for a rainy day. Now that she has returned to the base, why don't you hurry to let her stay? Why don't you see her or sign for her to let her go? What are you planning? Ah Feng couldn't hold back anymore. Li Nanheng's face was cold and calm. It has nothing to do with me whether she returns to the base or not. When did I help her prepare for a rainy day? Xiao Su couldn't help glancing at him. Then after she was forcibly taken away from Boston, the Tet couple took her away so smoothly, and now the letter of appointment to the base has been issued so smoothly. She has regained all her face. Does it have nothing to do with you, boss? Please remember the domain name of this book. For mobile version website, M. Chapter 1069. That's her own business. Do you think she will be useful just because I asked Mr. Ted to hire her as a bodyguard and let her go to the city hall? Li Nanheng said coldly. Ah Feng chuckled. Others might not understand this, but we can. You knew that Mr. Ted's family was grateful to Feng Ling for saving them, so you used this incident as bait and successfully lured Feng Ling back to Los Angeles from Boston. It seemed like nothing happened, but in fact your plan was very shrewd. You helped her pave the way back to the base with the help of Mr. and Mrs. Ted. When the election time came, you could bring her back to the base. That's right, boss. You're obviously still thinking about her in your heart. Why do you have to be so cold as if nothing has happened? You think too much. Li Nanheng stood there calmly and glanced at Ah Feng. Don't mention this name in front of me again. If you talk to me again, I'll tell the Li family that you're neglecting your duty here and kick you back to the Li family. Ah Feng was about to curse, but before he could say anything he saw Li Nanheng's back. He was clearly the one who had already paved the way for Feng Ling, but now he turned around and refused to admit it. How King annoying. Li Nanheng walked quickly out of the base hall. Under the hot morning sun, his face was as cold as frost. He walked back with only one thought in his mind. When Feng Ling left the base, she had to take back what she had lost by herself. She did it. She had a proud personality and was extremely strong. If someone hurt her once, it would be useless even if that person paid back 1,000 times more. If she wanted to deny something, it would be equivalent to it not existing. She only wanted to rely on herself and didn't want to ask for help from anyone. She didn't even want to come back to 11 base. She could clearly use the road he had paved for her, but until now she still refused. She was really stubborn and stupid. Li Nanheng sneered, but then he smiled self-deprecatingly. No. In fact, there was someone more stubborn and stupid than her. Otherwise, he wouldn't have fallen head first into her pit and couldn't climb up even after his head was broken and bleeding. Feng Ling waited outside his room for a long time. She didn't know when he would come back. She wanted to go to the room she used to stay in but found that the door was locked. It seemed like the door was locked when she came that day. Unless she agreed to move in, the door would always be locked and no one else could enter. There was no place to sit in the corridor. She had been standing for a long time. Even if she had enough stamina, it wasn't enough to keep standing. She squatted by the wall for a while until her legs were numb. Just as she was about to stand up, she suddenly heard footsteps coming from the corridor. She turned to look in the direction of the staircase. In the next second, her legs gave way and she almost knelt down. The light in the corridor was a little dim, but it was still spacious. Li Nanheng stood there looking at her coldly. The moment Feng Ling met his gaze, she raised her hand to support herself against the wall. She secretly cursed herself for squatting earlier. Her legs were numb and she could not stand steadily for a moment. This posture was somewhat awkward. When she looked at him again, she felt as if she could be frozen into an ice cube under his gaze. The man who had almost died with her in the Boston jungle 9 months ago was standing there, looking at her expressionlessly and indifferently. It was not until the moment they finally met that Feng Ling realized that she and Li Nanheng had brushed past each other in the past 9 months, but basically they had never seen each other before. Even when their eyes met, they were very strange and alienated. In her mind, when Li Nanheng wanted to bully her, he would just drag her out in the middle of the night, impose devil training on her, exhaust her strength, watch her lie on the ground exhausted, and then wait for her to beg for mercy. Or perhaps it was his honesty, his coldness and ruthlessness to others, his high spirits and his patience with her. At that time he only had eyes for her. As long as she passed by, his eyes would follow her. However, at this moment, the expressionless man standing at the top of the stairs was wearing a black combat uniform. He had neat short hair and handsome facial features. It was as if he was still the same person as before, but at the same time he seemed to be different. His hair used to be very short, but now it seemed to be much shorter and neat. Compared to 9 months ago when he looked too thin and haggard when he was seriously injured, now he looked the same as before. He just stood there straight and looked like he was hiding a hidden sense of strength. His temperament seemed to be different. It could not be said that it was temperament. It could only be said that when he stood in front of her, his gaze and the attitude he exuded were indifferent and distant. He stood there expressionlessly, his eyes meeting hers in mid-air. There was no sadness or joy, as if he was looking at a stranger. This kind of gaze reminded Feng Ling of the dinner party she attended with the Ted couple a few months ago. At that time his eyes were also like this, but there was no emotion in his eyes. They were so cold that she wondered if there would be a second person in this world who looked exactly like him. Otherwise, how could he be so cold? Now seeing him standing here, the numbness in Feng Ling's legs disappeared and she stood up straight. Thousands of thoughts flashed through her mind, but it only took a few seconds. She looked at him and said directly, "I heard that Mr. Mo is going to choose a capable person from 11 base to go to High City to protect Mrs. Mo's safety. After all, Mrs. Mo is a woman. It will be more convenient to have a female bodyguard by her side. I plan to go to High City to take over this bodyguard job. Give me your signature." After speaking, Feng Ling retracted her gaze, tried to calm down, and continued to stand there. "As long as you give me your signature, I can leave immediately." Li Nanheng looked at her indifferently and then moved his gaze away from her. He walked straight over but did not stand in front of her. Instead, he brushed past her, came to the door of his room, opened the door and entered without looking back. Then he closed the door without saying a word. Feng Ling stood outside the door and stared blankly for more than 10 seconds. Her heart skipped a beat, and the calmness that she had just maintained on her face collapsed in an instant. "Remember what you said today." The words that the man said hoarsely in her ear before he was seriously injured and fainted echoed in her ears again. It was a brief brush with each other, as if they were strangers, separating the past from the present, forming a boundary between the past and the present. Please remember this book's domain name. For mobile version website, M. Chapter 1070. Feng Ling's heart surged and she looked at the closed door in front of her again. But the door was still closed. It was as if what she had said and what he had said had been verified. Nothing had happened, no love, no existence. Even though she was prepared, Feng Ling looked down at the document in her hand, thinking that she had been waiting for him for so many days, and still went up to knock on the door. After knocking a few times, she put down her hand and waited for a while. It was quiet inside and no one came to open the door. After waiting for another 2 minutes, she raised her hand and knocked a few more times. After repeating this for about a few minutes, the door finally opened. The man stood in the door. He had already taken off his uniform jacket and stood inside in only a black short-sleeved t-shirt. He still looked at her indifferently, not like the person who used to look at her with warm and fiery eyes, but the devil bossly in others' mouths. There was no trace of a smile on his face, and his eyes were so indifferent that she couldn't find any trace of extra emotion. The man put one hand in his trouser pocket. Even in a relaxed state, the lines of his arm faintly outlined the outline of his muscles. Under his gaze, Feng Ling felt that she was duckweed on the sea, helpless. Her heart that she thought was calm suddenly fluctuated, and she couldn't find a foothold. She told herself that she was just going to sign and leave, go far away to High City. Whether he loved her or hated her now, she put aside the old grudges for the time being. Right now, the most important thing was to let him sign and let her leave smoothly. But under his cold gaze, her heart inevitably sank. Feng Ling raised the document in her hand and held it to his eyes. "Boss, I want to go to High City. Sign this for me." The document in front of him blocked his face and also successfully blocked her face. However, the man didn't respond. After holding it for a while, Feng Ling put down the document and raised her eyes to meet his gaze. Then she suddenly wondered if it was because of the serious injury 9 months ago, or something happened to him in recent months that caused his facial paralysis. Was it love, hate, anger, or resentment? Just say it. Why was he so indifferent? Feng Ling held the document in her hand and looked straight at him. "Li, the high-ranking military officials will arrive at the base in half an hour. I'm going to take a shower now. If you want to wait, just wait outside. Don't bother me by knocking on the door." Li Nanheng stood there as steady as a mountain. His tone was as cold as ice. He looked away from her face and closed the door. Feng Ling, who was almost hit in the nose by the door, she retracted her gaze, took a few steps back and returned to her previous position to wait. Since the people from the military would arrive in half an hour, he wouldn't take too long to shower. It would be the same to wait for him to come out. No matter how cold his attitude was, she just needed to get his signature. Not long after, Li Nanheng came out after changing his clothes. The man's hair was very short and dried quickly, but when he came out, he smelled of shower gel. Feng Ling stepped forward and handed him the document again. Li Nanheng looked at the thing she handed over and her hand that suddenly blocked his way. His eyes were sharp and cold. When Feng Ling met his eyes, her heart that had just calmed down began to tremble again. She couldn't understand why her heart was in such turmoil. "I just want you to sign something," Feng Ling looked at him and said. "Sign it?" The next second, Li Nanheng asked expressionlessly and glanced at her hands. "Did you bring a pen?" Feng Ling was startled. She seemed to have been holding the document and didn't bring a pen. "Don't you have a pen in your room?" "I'm in a hurry to see the high-ranking military officials. I have something important to discuss. He has already arrived. Do you think I'll waste time signing with you here or go back to open the door to help you find a pen?" "It'll only take a minute or two." The man no longer looked at her but walked toward the stairs. Feng Ling looked at the man's indifferent back and quickly followed. "Li Nanheng, let's talk." The man didn't stop walking. He had no intention of talking. She followed his footsteps and walked out, saying, "After I left 11 base, I didn't plan to come back. I know I can come back now and I've won back the face I lost at that time. You must have helped me a lot, but I've already left and there's no need for me to come back. If you force me to come here, it will make things difficult for all parties. I really want to work for Mr. Mo, and Mrs. Mo needs someone to protect her." The man's footsteps suddenly stopped, and she also stopped in time to avoid bumping into his back. Li Nanheng looked back at her indifferently, his eyes cold. It's my business whether to do it or not. It's your business whether to go back or not. No one will force you. Leave or stay, it's up to you. Leave or stay. These words sounded calm when they came out of his mouth, but it seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. Feng Ling's heart instantly fluctuated and she couldn't calm down. Feng Ling stood there and looked at him, but the man didn't stay any longer and left. She stood for a while and looked at his back. Seeing that he was indeed walking in the direction of the base's conference room, she took a look at the time and found that she couldn't delay any longer. Feng Ling lowered her head and looked at the document in her hand that she had yet to receive his signature. She then looked at the man's cold and arrogant back and recalled his gaze on her when he said that she could stay or leave as she pleased. Feng Ling didn't know why she suddenly felt a burning sensation in her throat, and a corner of her heart collapsed. In the past 9 months, she almost forgot that Li Nanheng didn't plan to see her again in the hospital. She didn't expect that when they met again after returning to 11 base, he really didn't want to see her. That expression, that tone, that look in his eyes. There was disgust in his indifference. Han Jin saw this scene not far away. When Li Nanheng walked far away, he looked at the things in Feng Ling's hand and then at Feng Ling, who seemed to be in a bad situation. Boss really has something to do today. Why don't you look for him tomorrow? Feng Ling was silent for a moment and smiled. It's okay. When can he finish talking with the people from the military? I'll wait for him here. Are you in such a hurry to go to High City? It's uncomfortable to stay in the base for one more day? No, I think it's necessary to talk to him. Talk about what? Han Jin glanced at her indifferently. 9 months ago in the jungle of Boston, didn't you say that you would never talk to him? Do you think Bosley will talk to you? Please remember the domain name of this book. For mobile version website, M. Chapter 1071. She didn't regret what she said at that time. It was just that Feng Ling didn't expect that what she said at that time was really a sharp sword to Li Nanheng. Hurting others but also hurting herself? Feng Ling stood there expressionlessly. Han Jin looked at her again and glanced at the document in her hand. Are you really going to High City? I don't know. I can go anywhere. You mean, as long as you don't go back to 11 base, you are willing to be sent to the African refugee area? Feng Ling didn't answer, but it was clear that this was what she meant. Even if she hesitated now, at least this was what she meant these days. Han Jin probably saw the bitterness in her heart and saw that she was humiliated by Grandfather Li in public, so he softened his tone and said gently, all right, in fact it's just a matter of signing. When boss is done with his work he will definitely sign it for you. If you want to go to other places he may not necessarily let you go, but since you are going to Mr. Mo's place, there is nothing to worry about. It's just that your attitude is too tough. You and Boss Li are now fighting each other head-on. One is stubborn and the other is not good-tempered. You have to go through the process of signing the permission to leave the country. Since you are now in the base, just wait patiently or you can soften your attitude a little and he will let you go. At this time, someone came over and said a few words to Han Jin. Han Jin nodded and said, I'll be right there. Then he glanced at Feng Ling again. When he walked past her, he raised his hand and patted her gently on the shoulder. Since you are already standing in 11 base, I have to tell you something. Take it as a reminder. Since returning from Boston, Boss Li has never mentioned your name again. Feng Ling was silent for a moment and smiled. Why did he mention my name? There is no need to mention it. The corner of Han Jin's mouth twitched. You really don't know how different he was when he was looking for you in the past 2 years and how different he was in the past 9 months. I just want to tell you that when Boss Li loves you and wants to bear everything for you, he has enough ability to shelter you from the wind and rain, but if Boss Li digs you out of his heart and eyes now, it will be difficult for you to see him, let alone to pave the way for you or shelter you from the wind and rain. After that, Han Jin looked at the time again and left. Feng Ling stood in place and looked in the direction where Han Jin left. Yes, it was indeed difficult for her to see Li Nanheng now. The senior military officials held a meeting in the base for the entire afternoon and didn't finish until 4 o'clock in the evening. The news K brought to Feng Ling was that the base would hold a banquet to entertain the senior military officials tonight. Boss Li would spend most of his time in the base hall or in the special reception room of the base. He wouldn't return to his residence until very late. If she wanted to wait for him, she'd better change places. And there were a lot of things to be discussed in this meeting. Boss Li might not have the patience to pay attention to her, so she had to be prepared. He was busy, so Feng Ling wouldn't pester him, but after being ignored in the base for several days, she really felt that it was better to get the pain over with. He could immediately sign the papers and let her go. He could do whatever he wanted and she wouldn't say a word. Why did he have to keep her in the base and not let her go? Feng Ling went to the base hall but didn't see him. She went to the reception room but didn't see him either. But she was sure that Li Nanheng would stay in the base for the next 2 days and wouldn't go out for the time being. She simply returned to the sniper team to play sniper games with Kay and the others when he was particularly busy today and didn't go to see him again. The next day, when the military people left, Feng Ling came to Li Nanheng's door again with the documents that needed to be signed. Li Nanheng came out of the door in the morning. When he passed by her, he didn't even look at her face, nor did he give her a chance to speak. His cell phone rang and he picked up the phone and walked out without looking back. Feng Ling followed behind him, and Li Nanheng didn't look back the whole time. Then he was suddenly stopped by the drill master of Team 4, who said that there was a problem with the newcomers of Team 4 and boss needed to go over to have a look. Then Li Nanheng was intercepted by the drill master of Team 4. After that, Feng Ling didn't find Li Nanheng in the canteen in the training camp of each team, and on every road he might pass by. That afternoon Dr. Qin called. "Little Feng Ling, have you settled it?" "Not for the time being." "Why? You won't sign it?" "He ignores me." Feng Ling's tone was a bit flat, but there was a hint of hidden anger in it. Then she seemed to hear Qin Siting's chuckle on the other side of the phone. "At first, he couldn't wait to hang you on his body and walk around all day for fear that you would catch a cold. Now he ignores you and refuses to let you go. Then I think we'd better look for other people in your base. The point is that Mo Jingshan doesn't intend to find a male bodyguard at all. He wants a woman to accompany his wife. He originally planned to hire you, but if there are any changes to your side, it will be really difficult to find a female bodyguard similar to you. I'll work harder. If I can't, I'll sneak over." "I wouldn't go so far as to sneak in. Initially, I only gave you a suggestion to come out and change to a new environment. Seeing that you agreed so readily, I put this matter at ease and mentioned it to Mo Jingshan." Qin Siting said with a smile, "But if Nanheng refuses to let you go, let alone me, even if Mo Jingshan comes in person and puts a knife to his neck, he may not let you go. He doesn't have any reason not to let me go. In recent months, Nanheng often goes to High City and spends more time in High City than in the United States. Recently, because of grandfather Li's physical condition, he rushed back and doesn't know when he will return to High City. I think it's better for you to go with him when he is about to leave the country. He won't leave you alone at the airport. You said that even if I put a knife to his neck, he may not let me go. Even if I pester him to the airport, will he still take me on the plane?" "That's true. First, he won't compromise so easily. Second, you won't pester him." Both of their tempers were hard to deal with. One was cautious and closed his heart, and the other was a man of his word. Please remember this book's domain name. For M. Chapter 1072. In fact, it didn't matter whether she went to High City or not. But when her temper was really stubborn, she became obsessed with the matter of Li Nanheng's signature. Even if she couldn't see him, she still had to see him. He didn't go back to his residence or the canteen. Well, he had to go to the bathroom. Every day he only went to these places, but most of the bathrooms in the base were in the middle area. The passages outside led to various training camps, but no matter which side he came from, he still had to go to the largest and most spacious bathroom in the middle. The one he often visited was also the one in the middle. No matter how a person was, this habitual way of life wouldn't change. He would definitely go to this bathroom. Feng Ling simply went to the bathroom to stop him. Since the morning she had been in the bathroom. Of course, she tried not to let others find her. In the past, there was only a men's bathroom in the base. Later, because of her, a guest bathroom was set up next to the men's bathroom. On the surface, it was because of the occasional female officers in the military, so the one-way arrangement was really inconvenient, so another bathroom was set up, but in fact, it was also because of Feng Ling's incident that they were reminded of something. Feng Ling had been staying in the bathroom next door, and the people in the training camp all went to the bathroom opposite, so no one could find her. Feng Ling didn't need to poke her head out to see every time. She was very familiar with Li Nanheng's footsteps. She could tell whether he came in or not through the wall. Just when Feng Ling silently read the document in her hand for almost the 100th time, she finally heard the man's footsteps. Hearing him approaching, she walked out of the bathroom. Li Nanheng did come to the bathroom to pee. Looking at the woman who suddenly jumped out of the next room, He didn't change his expression but just looked at her indifferently. "You came to the bathroom to stop me?" Feng Ling didn't explain but handed him the pen and paper in her hand. "Sign it." Seeing that she even brought a pen this time, Li Nanheng glanced at her coldly, ignored her, and turned into the men's bathroom. Feng Ling was not in a hurry. He wouldn't stay in the bathroom forever. Sure enough, a few minutes later, the man came out and was blocked by Feng Ling. Looking at her persistent expression, Li Nanheng sneered, took the pen and paper and asked her, "Are there wolves, tigers and leopards in 11 base?" She didn't answer but in her heart, 11 base has you. Although she didn't say it, the man clearly understood what she meant. Without another word, he placed the paper on the wall outside the bathroom door and signed his name. He threw the pen and paper into her arms and strode out without looking back. When he was almost out the door, he said indifferently, "I'll fly to High City in 2 days. Come with me." Feng Ling looked at the document in her hand that had already been signed by him and was just about to heave a sigh of relief when she abruptly raised her eyes to look at the man's back. "Go with him. He's going to High City." With him. Feng Ling didn't understand what he meant. She stood there and forgot to agree or refuse. She also forgot to say anything else. She just watched the man's back as he walked away. 2 days later. Los Angeles X International Airport. Previously, every time Feng Ling went on a mission with the base, even if it was to other countries such as Cambodia, she usually took the base's helicopter to fly there. This was the first time she took an ordinary commercial plane and didn't know much about the situation in the airport. In the morning, when Li Nanheng said he was going to the airport, she took a look at the time and wondered if it was too early. However, Li Nanheng just carried her suitcase away with a cold face and got into the car without even explaining. Feng Ling had to follow him. When she arrived at the airport, she learned that even the first-class cabin needed to pass the security check and prepare enough time in advance. However, there were not many people in the first-class security check channel. After entering the waiting hall, she followed Li Nanheng all the way into the first-class lounge. While sitting on the sofa waiting for the plane, Feng Ling looked at the time again. There was still an hour before boarding. It was really troublesome to take a commercial plane. Unlike the helicopter in the base, she could directly fly away. As calm as Feng Ling was, she looked for a bathroom in this strange and overly large waiting hall for a long time. When she finally found one, she couldn't help complaining in her heart. This time Xiao Su also went to High City with them. Seeing that Feng Ling had left for so long, Xiao Su couldn't help asking, "Where did you go?" "To find the bathroom," Feng Ling answered. "Xiao Su, why did you take so long to find the bathroom?" "The waiting hall is very big. I walked a long way to find it." Xiao Su couldn't help looking back at the 2 luxurious and high-end bathrooms in the first-class waiting room. "There's one here. How far did you go?" Feng Ling turned to look in the direction Xiao Su pointed. Sure enough, there were 2 on the side closest to here. Also, the bathrooms in the airport are usually very close to each other. You'll meet one every few steps. Did you not see the sign clearly? Feng Ling. She had never been to a normal airport, let alone a large international airport like Los Angeles. She did walk for a long time and didn't look at the signs on both sides. She just kept looking for a sign indicating whether there was a bathroom or not. She looked for a long time but didn't see a sign. Finally, she turned around and suddenly saw a bathroom next to her, so she went in. Xiao Su couldn't help but smile when he saw her expression. She usually had a cold and indifferent face, but now she looked a little adorable because of this little embarrassing thing. Then he turned to look at Li Nanheng, who had been sitting on the sofa without speaking, only to see that Boss Li was still silently looking at the magazine in his hand. He didn't even look away. Xiao Su didn't know if he had heard their conversation or not. Seeing that Boss was so cold as if it had nothing to do with him, Xiao Su couldn't continue to laugh, quickly stopped smiling, turned to pour 2 glasses of water and put them in their hands. Feng Ling sat back on the sofa and didn't look at Li Nanheng. For her, she was going to High City, but she didn't expect that after so many days he finally signed the contract, but when he was also going to High City, it became a partnership. She refused to go back to 11 base. Didn't he know who she was hiding from? Outside the waiting hall, the sun was shining. Feng Ling didn't look at the man's cold face, lest they would freeze each other to death, so she turned her eyes to the sun outside. Please remember the domain name of this book. For M. Chapter 1073. When boarding the plane, Xiao Su walked in front with his suitcase. Although they were all first class, Xiao Su sat in the seat near the window. After getting on the plane, he asked the flight attendant for a blanket, a blindfold and headphones, and directly fell asleep there without a sound. There were many passengers on this direct flight from Los Angeles to High City, but there were only 4 seats in the advanced first-class cabin. Xiao Su slept in the back and there was no one sitting in the other seat. Feng Ling and Li Nanheng sat on the same side, and their seats were next to each other, and Feng Ling was leaning against the window. After the plane took off and stabilized, she saw that the seat next to Xiao Su was empty. After a moment of hesitation, she was about to get up and go there. However, the flight attendant in the first-class cabin who specialized in serving them said with a polite smile, "Miss, I'm sorry. The first-class seat must be strictly according to the seat on your boarding pass." Hearing this, Feng Ling didn't move and returned to her seat to sit down, but Li Nanheng was by her side. Even though he hadn't spoken and had been reading the English newspaper on the plane, she still felt uncomfortable. After hiding from him for so many days, she finally got the signature and could leave, but she flew to High City with him. Although they didn't talk during the whole flight, the feeling of sitting on the plane together was really strange. After flying for a while, the flight attendant handed them a delicate menu and asked them to order. Feng Ling didn't know that there was such a service on the plane. She didn't know the difference between the first-class cabin and the brokerage cabin. She took a look at the menu and was about to speak, when she heard the man next to her say lightly, "Red wine." Was there red wine? She looked at the menu in her hand carefully and turned it over. Sure enough, she saw the words "red wine" on the back. Xiao Su woke up, because he wanted to eat, so he took off the blindfold and headphones. At this time he turned around and saw Feng Ling holding the menu over there. She seemed to be a little calm, but in fact she was still very cute. He smiled, ordered a few things and returned the menu to the flight attendant. Then he leaned back in his seat, thinking about whether to continue wearing the blindfold and headphones while waiting for the meal. He had been sleeping for so long just now and tried to pretend that he didn't exist so as not to disturb them, but it seemed that it didn't work. Not only did the two of them not communicate a word, but Feng Ling even wanted to sit with him just now. Boss Li was really tolerant. He refused to sign the contract a few days ago because he was worried about her flying to High City alone, so he finally dragged her down and personally accompanied her to High City, but he still kept a cold face all the way as if it had nothing to do with him. Xiao Su tooted in his heart but didn't dare to show any change on his face. Feng Ling also ordered a few dishes. As for the drinks, she wanted to see how Li Nanheng's red wine was. If it looked good, she would also order a bottle. While waiting for the meal, Li Nanheng got up and went to the bathroom. Coincidentally, when he left, the meal Feng Ling ordered had been delivered. There was also a bottle of red wine which was placed on the same tray. Feng Ling knew that these things didn't seem to cost money. Could it be that they saw that she didn't have anything to drink and specially gave her a bottle of red wine? She didn't check if the table in front of Li Nanheng was empty. Anyway, he didn't care about his affairs. She picked up the knife and fork and ate something. It tasted good. Then she opened the red wine bottle, poured it into the delicate goblet on the plate and took a sip. It tasted good. It had the taste of wine and was very sweet. It was a very pure red wine. Although she didn't know much about wine, she knew that it was a very famous brand in the American wine industry from the words on the bottle. It was said that it would take more than 10 hours to fly to High City, China. Feng Ling knew that her alcohol tolerance was not very good, but there was really nothing to do on the plane. She extended the time she took to eat and occasionally took a sip to kill time. When Li Nanheng came back, he saw that his red wine was on her side. He just glanced at it and didn't say anything. The flight attendant came over and asked him in a low voice if he wanted another bottle. He waved his hand, indicating that he didn't need it, sat down and picked up the magazine again. Feng Ling didn't look at him and he didn't look at her. A long time passed. When Li Nanheng was about to change the magazine, he glanced at the wine bottle in front of her out of the corner of his eye. It was almost empty. Looking at the almost empty red wine bottle, Li Nanheng raised his eyebrows and turned to look at Feng Ling. The little woman with short hair was blushing at this moment, but she obviously didn't know it. She killed time and unknowingly drank the whole bottle of wine. This kind of wine had a strong aftereffect. She didn't feel much when she just drank it. At least she felt that she was still sober. Although she was sober, she gradually felt a little sleepy. After asking the flight attendant to remove all the things in front of her, Feng Ling felt that the aftereffect of the wine had taken effect, and her sleepiness became more and more obvious. She didn't know if she could sleep a little longer, but as long as she fell asleep, the more than 10 hours of sitting by Li Nanheng's side would be shortened a lot. She allowed the drowsiness to overwhelm her and closed her eyes. When the flight attendant came back, she saw that she seemed to be asleep and was about to bring a thin blanket to cover her. However, as soon as she came back with the thin blanket, she saw that Miss Feng, who was sleeping on the seat, unknowingly fell to the side by the window. Just as her head was about to hit the window, the handsome man next to her suddenly stretched out his arm to protect her head. Miss Feng, who was sleeping, began to fall to the other side because of inertia and instinct because of being suddenly blocked by his palm, until her head directly leaned on the shoulder of the man next to her. This scene seemed to happen a little unexpectedly, but inexplicably, it seemed to be very harmonious. The flight attendant looked at the man who had been wearing a cold face all the time. Seeing that his face didn't improve at this moment, there seemed to be a flash of softness between his eyebrows. Because of the flight attendant's curious gaze, he turned to look at her indifferently, reached out to take the thin blanket, and motioned for her to go. The flight attendant nodded and hurriedly stepped back. Then she saw that the man covered Miss Feng with the blanket and didn't push her head away. He even tilted his slightly higher position to make it more comfortable for her to lean on. The flight attendant was a little dumbfounded. Although the two of them boarded the plane together, they didn't seem to communicate with each other. Weren't they strangers? They looked like a young couple quarreling and having a cold war. There is a Chinese romance finals in Hangzhou. Papa will take the time to help Qingqing's book. The time for the release of chapters should be February 4th. Yes, on New Year's Eve I will also hold the computer and write chapters hard. Please remember the domain name of this book. For M. Chapter 1074. Feng Ling leaned on Li Nanheng's shoulder and fell asleep unknowingly. Her body was filled with the mellow fragrance of red wine, and her usually cold face was not as cold and stern as usual. Instead, she looked relaxed as she slept. Xiaosu vaguely felt that something was wrong. Although it was very quiet just now, it felt different from now. He forced himself to pretend to be invisible and tried to sleep, but he still couldn't fall asleep. He quietly lifted the blindfold and glanced at the two seats on the other side of the aisle. When he saw them, his eyes immediately lit up. He threw away the blindfold and turned his head to take a closer look at Feng Ling, who was sleeping soundly on Boss Li's shoulder. Feeling the gaze from next door, Li Nanheng didn't look at him but still sat there and read a magazine expressionlessly. But even though there was no warmth on his face, in order to make Feng Ling more comfortable, he had already laid down a little. This change was very obvious. Xiaosu snickered and withdrew his gaze. Gee, it seemed that flying for more than 10 hours was not without any sense of accomplishment. At least it could melt the stiff relationship between the two of them a little bit. Sir, would you like to order a glass of red wine? Seeing that he didn't sleep, the flight attendant came over and asked kindly in a low voice. Xiaosu froze for a moment and then looked at Feng Ling, who was sleeping over there. Did she drink red wine before falling asleep? Xiaosu now realized that the 3 first-class passengers should know each other, so he nodded. Yes. Xiaosu raised his eyebrows. How much did she drink? A whole bottle. The flight attendant smiled. We were going to pour a glass for that gentleman, but I went to the broker's cabin to help him. When I came back, I saw that this lady had drunk a lot. That gentleman didn't say anything, so I didn't stop her. Fortunately, the flight time is relatively long. She can sleep like this and wake up after the plane lands, so we didn't wake her up. A whole bottle? How much did Feng Ling not want to sit together with Boss Li for more than 10 hours? She clearly knew how bad her alcohol tolerance was, but she actually quietly drank an entire bottle by herself. Then again, the flight attendant didn't dare to stop her. Boss Li was watching by the side, but didn't he stop her? Or did Boss Li order this wine for her? Xiaosu couldn't help but look in that direction again. Li Nanheng was silent the whole time. Even when Xiaosu turned to look at him with his mouth wide open, he ignored him. He looked cold and aloof. Boss. When the flight attendant left, Xiaosu asked in a low voice, Feng Ling's alcohol tolerance is so poor. Although we still have to fly for more than 10 hours, are you sure she can wake up after the plane lands? Li Nanheng said lightly, didn't High City arrange a car to pick you up? There will be a car to pick her up. If she doesn't wake up, are you going to carry her out yourself? Yes. Ah, then I understand. Boss, you're really good at playing tricks. You forced her to come to High City with you and pretended to be cold and indifferent, but in fact, every step the little girl took was under your control. You've learned from Mr. Mo. You're really good at playing tricks. Li Nanheng paused and glanced at him. What tricks did I play? I'm not an immortal. How can I be so accurate? Don't flatter me. You're not an immortal, but Mr. Mo is. Mr. Mo has already said that if he doesn't take Feng Ling away from you, you'll probably die in his hands. Give her something to do, and it'll give you some time to think about the recent arms business. Xiao Su chuckled as he spoke. He couldn't tell whether Boss Li or Mr. Mo was better. Anyway, when this group of people stood together, it was like a fight between immortals, and each of their means was more advanced than the other. He's not smart. His purpose is to find someone he can trust to protect his wife. There's only one woman in the entire 11 base. Who else can he choose if not Feng Ling? Li Nanhing didn't have the time to pay attention to Xiao Su. He just turned the page of the magazine in his hand and continued to read. Ahem, I was almost fooled by you a few days ago. Now, it seems that you already knew about this arrangement, but you deliberately dragged her to go with you today. Are you afraid that she will get lost in the airport? That's right. That's right. After all, she has never taken a normal plane. She is too inexperienced, so I can't rest assured. Let's not talk about feelings. I watched her grow up. I can't let her get lost in the airport. Otherwise, it will be the shame of our 11 base. Li Nanheng was still looking at the magazine in his hand, and his tone was very indifferent. Tut 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 tut. Xiao Su clicked his tongue several times in his heart. He was so sour that his teeth were about to fall off. When Feng Ling left the base, you looked for her for 2 years. Later, when she went to Boston, you probably didn't have a chance to have a good talk with her. Then in the next 9 months, it's even more indescribable. Now she finally sits next to you, and there's nowhere for her to run or escape on the plane. It's rare that you can have a good talk with her. Why did you let her drink so much? Li Nanheng's eyes were very indifferent. I have nothing to say. Then after you send her to High City, you really plan to leave her alone? Li Nanheng glanced at him coldly and ignored him. Xiao Su suddenly saw that Feng Ling's head, which was resting on his shoulder, seemed to move at this moment. He immediately shut his mouth, lest she heard what she shouldn't hear. Feng Ling did not wake up. Although it was comfortable to lean against him after a long time, she still felt that her neck was a little sore. She moved her head slightly and rubbed her cheeks that were flushed from the alcohol against Li Nanheng's shoulder. She did not find the right position. Just as she found a comfortable position to continue sleeping, her head suddenly lowered and she almost hit the armrest of the chair. Li Nanheng raised his hand to protect her head in time, stroked her forehead, lifted her head, and pushed her back to the seat to continue sleeping. However, Feng Ling, who was asleep, was still subconsciously looking for a more comfortable sleeping position. Her head slowly fell to the left of the seat bit by bit until it leaned against his shoulder again. Li Nanheng lowered his eyes to look at the little woman who only knew to rely on him after she fell asleep. He thought that in order to leave 11 base, in order to run far away from him, in order to get his signature, this woman even dared to block him in the bathroom. Please remember the domain name of this book. For M. Chapter 1075. Li Nanheng raised his hand and pushed her head away, letting her lean back on the seat again. However, after only a few minutes, Feng Ling stubbornly frowned uncomfortably in her sleep, suddenly stretched out her hand, hugged his arm hard, and rested her head on his shoulder again. This time, she wrapped her arms around his body until she found a comfortable position against him and slowly relaxed her frown. Xiao Su watched silently by the side, and then he saw that Boss Li, who had been cold-faced, was irritated by Feng Ling's action of holding his arm. When they arrived at High City, it was 4 o'clock in the morning in China. Xiao Su was right. Feng Ling had not woken up yet. It was probably because the alcohol content of the red wine was not low. She had drunk so much, but she had been sleeping the whole time and had not woken up even after landing on the ground. Xiao Su volunteered to carry her off the plane, but of course he didn't get this opportunity. The first-class cabin could get off the plane first, so it was not as crowded as the back. Li Nanheng carried Feng Ling and walked out, and the flight attendants couldn't help covering their mouths when they saw this scene. Her mother was also pillowed on her shoulder the whole time. She didn't even move a bit after that. She just let her lean on her and sleep like that. Now she was carrying her off the plane. Xiao Su struggled to drag the suitcases of the 3 of them and followed them with a bitter smile. Boss Li carried a person in his arms but still walked fast, but Xiao Su's 3 suitcases were extremely heavy. When they walked out of the airport arrival hall, there were already MO Corporation and 11 bases domestic personnel waiting there. Li Nanheng glanced at his watch and said, "Let's go to the hotel first." A group of energetic young men in suits with crew-cut hair shouted in unison, "Yes." Xiao Su handed the luggage to them and followed them into the car. Seeing Li Nanheng sit in the back row and put Feng Ling on the seat next to him, he grinned and asked, "Boss, you are really smart." Li Nanheng asked him, "Why?" "But if she comes to High City alone, it will be different. Mr. Mo has so many bodyguards, many of whom are more powerful than her, and many of them are arranged by 11 base. Anyway, there will be a lot of decent men, especially those people just now. Many of them are Mr. Mo's henchmen. You are afraid that Feng Ling will be abducted in High City, so you carry her off the plane. Anyway, she doesn't know how to resist when she is drunk. In this way, everyone can see that Feng Ling has a special relationship with you, so no one dares to have any ideas about her, right? The more Xiao Su spoke, the more he grinned, and he was proud that he could understand Boss Li's mind. The young man who was driving in the front suddenly said, "Mr. Li, please rest assured. We definitely don't dare to flirt with your woman." Li Nanheng glanced at the guy who was driving and said indifferently, "Focus on driving. Don't talk so much nonsense. Mo Jingshan begged this person from me. You have to treat him well, not flirt with him." "Okay." The young man who was driving said very seriously, "Yes, we will treat her well." Xiao Su coughed. "You don't have to be so serious. With Feng Ling's temper, if she is really treated well, she will probably run away first. This is not like the United States. If she really runs away, I don't think you will be able to find her again, boss." Before Li Nanheng spoke, the young man who was driving suddenly said seriously, "Mr. Li, the Mo Corporation treats her very well and the food is good. Mrs. Mo is very kind and will never bully her. Miss Feng will definitely work well and live a happy life in High City. She won't have any thoughts of running away. You can rest assured that you will hand her over to us," Li Nanheng scolded coldly. "I'm afraid Jin Wan can't beat her even if she wants to." In the car, the serious atmosphere because of his gloomy face was broken in an instant. The young man who was driving chatted with Xiao Su for a while and continued to drive. At nearly 5 o'clock in the morning, they arrived at a 7-star hotel in the center of High City. Li Nanheng carried Feng Ling, who was still drunk and unconscious, out of the car. Ignoring the curious eyes of the staff in the hotel, he carried her into the elevator and walked all the way to the room that had already been arranged. Xiao Su followed them to send the luggage in, but when he followed them out of the elevator, he saw Boss Li carrying the woman in his arms straight to the room. His mind sobered up, and he hurriedly dragged the suitcase back to the elevator to the lower floor, not daring to follow them again. Li Nanheng carried Feng Ling into the room. He didn't have time to insert the card to turn on the light, so he kicked the door shut and carried her to the bed inside. Although the light was not turned on, this was the bustling downtown area of High City. Outside the window, the neon lights could vaguely see the outline of people. Putting her down, Li Nanheng turned to turn on the light. The moment the light in the room came on, he looked back and saw Feng Ling lying on the bed in a daze. Knowing that she was a poor drinker, she still drank a whole bottle. Sure enough, she didn't want to spend so much time with him on the plane and would rather sleep in this way. If she really had no feelings and was really calm, why did she use this way to escape? Thinking of 9 months ago when the two of them managed to escape in the jungle, she faced him and said that she had never loved him, which made Li Nanheng's body instantly covered with barbs. Now this woman was lying in front of him. And she couldn't even resist. He really wanted to put his hand on her neck and strangle her alive. Feng Ling was wearing sportswear and the zipper was pulled up very high. Now that she was lying on the bed, the top of the zipper was stuck under her neck, and it seemed uncomfortable. Li Nanheng stood by the bed and looked at her coldly for a while, leaned down to help her pull down the zipper, and at the same time he caught a glimpse of the small t-shirt she was wearing. Although it was not exposed from this angle, he could still see the bulge under her clothes. In the 3 years since she left 11 base, she had never wrapped her chest with a cloth again. In the last period of puberty, her breasts were getting better and better, and even lying down couldn't hide the view of her chest. With her current figure, even if she wrapped hundreds of layers of chest wrappings, she might not be able to cover this outline and curve. Please remember the domain name of this book. For M. Chapter 1076. Looking at the little woman lying on the bed and then at the scenery in her zipper, Li Nanheng's Adam's apple moved slightly, and his hand hung on her face. He was about to help her take off the sportswear jacket, but he suddenly found that facing Feng Ling like this, it was very difficult for him to control himself. He paused, pulled the blanket over her, and took out a cigarette from his trouser pocket. He walked to the window, lit a cigarette, and held it between his fingers, letting it flicker on and off. It was said that smoking could distract people and make them sober, but the scenes of Feng Ling appearing in front of him from the age of 13 to now kept flashing in his mind, including the ruthless words she said with a cold expression 9 months ago. He really didn't want to have anything to do with her. But as long as this woman appeared in 11 base, He found that he was already standing in the pit full of her name, and no matter how he climbed, he couldn't get out. Feng Ling seemed to smell the smoke, but it was not very strong, but she still opened her eyes subconsciously, but when she opened her eyes she still felt dizzy. She couldn't see the European-style lights on the ceiling clearly, but she could see that there were lights on. She didn't know if it was morning or night, or where exactly she was. She couldn't even remember clearly when she took the plane to High City. She just stared at the dazzling lights in a daze. After a while she struggled to sit up from the bed because she wanted to go to the toilet. Feng Ling supported herself with her hand on the bed and stood up unsteadily. She didn't know where the bathroom was, but she still walked a few steps in the room instinctively. She saw a partition door on the side that was not lit, and she staggered over. Her hand groped randomly on the wall and it seemed to be a light switch. She pressed it and sure enough the inside was lit. The toilet and bathroom were separated by two translucent glass doors. She opened the door with the toilet and went straight in. Hearing the movement, Li Nanheng turned back and saw that the woman had woken up. She drank too much and only now knew that she needed to go to the toilet. However, when Feng Ling entered the toilet, she stood by the toilet for a long time but couldn't untie her pants. This kind of sports pants all had a belt on the front. She clearly remembered that it was not tight every time. Why couldn't she untie it this time? The bathroom and toilet of this hotel were translucent glass, and there was a door outside that could be pulled at any time. Now the door was not closed, so all her movements inside were seen by the man. Seeing that she stood by the toilet for a long time with her hand on her abdomen, Li Nanheng walked over. Feng Ling was still struggling with the tighter and tighter belt around her waist. Suddenly, she seemed to hear footsteps and suddenly felt an invisible sense of oppression coming from behind. She suddenly turned back, and her somewhat drunken and hazy eyes directly met the figure of the tall man standing in front of the door. As soon as she saw Li Nanheng's face, Feng Ling subconsciously thought that she was still in the stage of dressing as a man in 11 base. She was a little confused as she tugged at the belt that seemed to be tied into a dead knot and said, "Boss, I can't untie the belt." Hearing her words and seeing that she was still completely sober, Li Nanheng raised his cold brows. "So, you help me," Feng Ling said as she staggered out of the toilet and stood in front of Li Nanheng. She leaned over with a confused expression, picked up the two ends of the belt with her two slender hands, and handed them to him. It seems to be tied into a dead knot. I can't untie it and I can't take off my pants. I want to go to the toilet. I can't hold it in." When she spoke, her tongue could not straighten. It was not that she had never been drunk before. But this time, in order to fly safely on the plane, she really drank too much. The after effect of that kind of red wine was not ordinary, and this time she was really drunk to a certain extent. Li Nanheng looked at the completely drunk woman in front of him and then at the two belts that were stuffed into his hands. Let him help her untie the belt and take off her pants? Should he untie it or not? Seeing that he did not move, Feng Ling did not hesitate to tug down the waist of the tight pants. "No, I really can't hold it in anymore. Boss, do you have scissors? If not, just cut it off." Li Nanheng pursed his lips and did not speak. Seeing that she was eager to go to the toilet, he raised his hand and pressed her shoulder, saying mildly, "Stand firm. Don't move." "Okay." Feng Ling stood firm with a blank expression and then lowered her head with a pair of drunken eyes, only to see that the man's slender and well-defined fingers were untying the belt of her sports pants that had been tied into a dead knot. Originally, this bag was not tied into a dead knot at all. It was she who randomly pulled it a few times, causing it to become a dead knot. In addition, she was a little anxious and pulled it too hard. Right now, the knot was already firm and it was indeed difficult to untie. Li Nanheng patiently helped her untie it, and when he untied it, he glanced at her unconscious expression. "Thank you, boss." Although her pants were untied, Feng Ling was still tongue-tied. She staggered and decisively turned into the bathroom again. When she closed the door and was about to sit on the toilet, she suddenly paused. Subconsciously, she felt that Boss Lee was still here. If she sat down to go to the toilet, wouldn't she be exposed? So she stood in front of the toilet and stood there for a long time as if she was going to go to the toilet. Li Nanheng would not even watch her go to the toilet. He turned around and was about to leave when he noticed that something was wrong. From the reflection outside the door, she seemed to be standing. He suddenly turned his eyes and saw that Feng Ling was standing in the toilet. His eyelids suddenly twitched. After watching her for a long time and seeing that she did not move, he opened the translucent glass door behind her. Seeing that she was still holding her pants, he frowned and asked, "Aren't you going to the toilet? What are you doing?" Feng Ling held the edge of the waist of her pants with both hands and looked back at him with some embarrassment. "Boss, do you know why I have to avoid you every time I go to the toilet?" Li Nanheng frowned. "Why?" Feng Ling hiccuped and said while holding back the urge to pee, "Because I feel inferior. After all, my one is not as big as yours, so every time I go to the toilet, I go in alone. So, boss, I'm going to the toilet now. Can you go out? Don't stand by and watch?" Li Nanheng frowned and looked at this Feng Ling who had even messed up the time after drinking too much. He thought that she was in the state when she was disguised as a man in 11 base. Seeing that her fingers were clenched tightly on the waist of her pants because of the discomfort, the man suddenly sneered and leaned against the bathroom door. "How small is it? Take it out and let me see. Please remember the domain name of this book. For M." Chapter 1077. Feng Ling was a little dazed. She watched as the man leaned against the door and watched as his arms were crossed. She paused for a moment before she pretended to take off her pants and said, "It's really too small. It's not easy to take it. Boss, let me go to the bathroom alone." "Didn't you say you feel inferior? Let me see how small you are and then tell you whether you need to feel inferior or not." The bathroom was very small. Even though the man stood by the door, his low voice seemed to be close to her ear. Feng Ling didn't dare to look at his face, so she simply didn't look at him. Standing in front of the toilet, she hesitated and hesitated. Anyway, she really hadn't seen the man's private part. She had only heard Kay and the others often talk about it, so she learned a few words from them. Now that she had her back to him, she shouldn't be able to see anything. She couldn't hold it anymore and simply took off her pants. Fortunately, her upper body was relatively long and could more or less cover some parts of the back. She didn't look at the man's eyes again and then searched there for a while. Anyway, she didn't find anything, but she still pretended to search and said, "Boss, I can't hold it anymore. You go out first." Li Nanheng looked at her slender and straight legs darkly. No matter how long her top was, it could only cover most of her buttocks, and the seductive lower part seemed to be tempting him to commit a crime. If he had known that a full bottle of red wine could make her so irrational, he should have drunk her long ago. The man was about to step forward when suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Li Nanheng immediately closed the bathroom door with a dark expression and turned to open the door, only to see that the MO Corporation had sent someone over. The person who came was Shin Mu, MO Jingxin's trusted assistant. Shin Mu smiled politely outside the door. "Mr. Li, I heard that the female bodyguard arranged for Mrs. MO has landed in High City. I'll introduce her to Mrs. MO these days. Is it convenient for you to meet her now?" Li Nanheng's face was dark, and his tall figure stood in front of the door, not letting him see anything in the room. His voice was as cold as ice. "What time is it now?" Shinmu raised his eyebrows. 5:30? 5:30 is work time? I purposely came earlier so that I can bring him to Mrs. Mo's place during working hours. That way I won't waste any time, right? They just arrived. What's the hurry? Let's talk about it at dawn. Li Nanheng decisively closed the door. Shinmu, who was blocked outside the door, was speechless. Damn, COMO and Mrs. Mo were in the U-Garden right now. He dutifully ran over early in the morning to contact the bodyguard. In the end, Li Nanheng had eaten explosives. He had heard that this female bodyguard seemed to have some relationship with Li Nanheng, but he didn't know the specifics. The whole world was bullying him for being single. Shenmu turned around and was about to leave dejectedly when he saw Xiao Su, who had just come upstairs because he knew he was coming. After the two of them met face to face, Xiao Su almost laughed out loud when he saw Shenmu's expression. "How is it? I told you not to come too early. You got scolded, right?" Shenmu walked over and couldn't help complaining. "That's right. Your boss Li's temper is really hard to control. He's not as easy to talk to as our COMO." Xiao Su was holding a cigarette in his mouth. When he heard this, he squinted at him and said meaningfully, your COMO's temper is so good that people often die without a burial place." Under his calm smile. "You speak as if your boss Li hasn't scolded you a few times. Iske, you speak as if you haven't been frozen at Mr. Mo's place?" The door closed again. Li Nanheng turned back to open the bathroom door, only to see that Feng Ling was still standing there hesitantly. It seemed that she didn't know how to go to the bathroom. Click. The bathroom door opened behind her, and she instantly stood up straight again. Her hand continued to reach forward. Li Nanheng's sharp gaze fell on her body. Seeing that she was not just pretending, he thought about how he had been deceived by her for so many years, and his expression changed drastically. Feng Ling was completely unaware of the man's thoughts at this moment. She turned to look at him innocently. "Boss, go to the bathroom." The moment she turned around, Li Nanheng looked away because she wasn't wearing any pants. This kind of thing would never happen if she was sober. She would never let it happen even if she was beaten to death. Feng Ling seemed to have almost forgotten whether she was a man or a woman. She stood in front of the toilet and was about to go to the toilet. Li Nanheng vaguely had a bad feeling. When he looked back and saw her suddenly standing there with her legs apart, the veins on his forehead bulged and he suddenly shouted, "Sit down." Feng Ling was frightened by his cold roar and her shoulders trembled. She was so scared that she quickly sat on the toilet. Only then did Li Nanheng close the bathroom door for her, turn around and walk out of the bathroom cubicle. Not long after, he heard the sound of the toilet flushing. Li Nanheng stood outside and looked at the time. He was about to call Xiao Su to ask him to prepare breakfast. However, after he called Xiao Su, the little woman who was so drunk that she could not even tell whether she was a man or a woman had not come out. Li Nanheng stood outside for a moment, opened the door and walked in. He saw that Feng Ling had already put on her pants, but she had covered the toilet lid, knelt by the toilet and was sleeping soundly on the white lid. Li Nanheng's face instantly turned livid. He bent down, helped her up, carried her by the waist, turned to walk out and put her back on the bed. As soon as her body landed on the bed, Feng Ling rubbed her head comfortably on the pillow and continued to sleep. She was so drunk that she had lost her usual vigilance. Or, no matter how much she repulsed him now, as long as he was by her side, she still felt a certain sense of security subconsciously, so she allowed herself to be so drunk. Li Nanheng lowered his head and saw that her trousers were a little loose because she had not fastened them after the belt was untied. Her clothes were also rolled up a little, revealing her flat and white lower abdomen. Perhaps because the man's gaze was too hot, Feng Ling opened her eyes slightly, but she could not see anything clearly. She only uttered an N with unclear emotions and fell asleep again. Chapter 1078. Her N caused the man's jaw to tighten. He stared at her, and the atmosphere seemed to be about to be torn apart. An oppressive feeling pressed down on her. Feng Ling instinctively tried to open her eyes, but she only opened them a little. She looked at the man in front of her in confusion. Li Nanheng's face appeared even more profound because of his lust. His handsome face was shrouded in the light, and a layer of shadow fell on her face. "Still not awake?" the man asked in a low voice. His voice was low and heavy. Feng Ling just looked at him and slowly blinked a few times. She looked at the man's deep eyes and kept looking at him. "Do you remember where you are now? Do you remember who I am? Do you remember your current situation?" The man looked at her deeply, and his narrowed black eyes emitted a sharp light. Feng Ling's state of consciousness was intermittent. She just looked at him, and there seemed to be many images overlapping in front of her eyes. In a corner of her heart that she had hidden, this man seemed to be shrouded in a layer of light that could not be ignored. It was as though he had fallen from the sky and intruded into her cold and dark heart. He had been in that place and had never left. However, she had erected a high wall to block his light. She forced herself to forget that hot and bright light, forget that he was in that corner and had never come out. The alcohol was stirring. Sometimes, under the catalysis of alcohol, the things in her mind would surge out and not be forcibly blocked. She suddenly smiled, and her eyes were filled with his reflection. She lay there and said hoarsely, "Li Nanheng? I like you?" She couldn't see the light that suddenly jumped out of the man's cold eyes. She just stared at him and said numbly and mechanically, "But you're already married. The media wrote that you married the daughter of the Feng family. Who else could you have married if not Feng Mingzhu?" She then looked at him with a seemingly self-deprecating smile. "I like you, very, very much. I like you so much that when I was kicked out of the base I thought that I might as well give up my dignity. But... She looked at him and tears suddenly flashed in her eyes. Even if it was just a flash of tears, it showed that it was not that she couldn't cry. It was just that her self-control was too strong, and she swallowed all the grievances. "But I can't call you brother-in-law while shamelessly liking you." Li Nanheng was moved by her rare words, but because of her words, his eyes suddenly paused. "Brother-in-law? What brother-in-law?" However, in the next moment, the crying short-haired little woman suddenly raised her head and kissed him with her soft lips. However, she did not know how to kiss. Even though she had been kissed by him many times in the past, she did not know how to respond. However, at this moment she clumsily tried to move her lips against his. Indeed, she was so clumsy that she did not even know how to use her tongue to pry open his mouth. All she knew was to call out to him and carefully suck on his lips. The trace of doubt in Li Nanheng's mind instantly collapsed because of his emotions. His back was stiff, his brows were deeply furrowed, and he looked down at her delicate and beautiful little face. He suddenly raised his hand to hold her chin and kissed her deeply without caring about anything else. Although Feng Ling always had short hair, her skin was very, very fair. Even when she was exposed to the sun and wind in the base, it did not affect her skin at all. It only made her look a little healthier than many fair-skinned girls. Her eyelashes were very long, and when she opened her eyes, they were very big and full of spirit. Every time she stared at those targets, absolute confidence and light bloomed in her eyes. When she closed her eyes, her long eyelashes were like a pair of ink-colored wings, and when they flapped, it would move people's hearts. At this moment, these long and curled eyelashes kept trembling because of such a fierce kiss. Li Nanheng almost couldn't control himself. He pressed his body weight against her and kissed her deeply. At the same time, he couldn't help but put his hand into her rolled-up clothes and gradually moved up. At the same time, he held the back of her head to prevent her from subconsciously retreating because of the kiss. He went deep into her mouth, forcefully and fiercely, not giving her any chance to breathe. She said she liked him. What she said after she was drunk was the truth. Back then she had said that she didn't like him and that she didn't love him. It was as if the knives that had been stabbed into his heart had been pulled out in an instant. Every wound had been healed by her tears and the words that she liked him. Just as he was unwilling to just touch her like this, he almost bit her lips and was about to completely unzip her blouse. The little woman who was trying hard to respond to him gradually lost her strength. When she stopped moving, he gradually stopped biting her lips and let go of her. He lowered his eyes to look at her, only to see that she actually kissed him and fell asleep again. However, when she fell asleep again because of the alcohol, there was still a tear hanging from the corner of her eye. Li Nanheng had never seen her cry, not even a drop of tear. Seeing the tears at the corner of her eyes, the taut string in his mind slowly loosened, and the emotions that had been accumulating for a long time also gradually relaxed. The desire and impulse that might have exploded on the spot if he didn't do her now also calmed down a little because of her tears. He slowly propped himself up from her body, looked at her sleeping face, looked at the tears at the corner of her eyes, and reached out to wipe the corner of her eyes. It was wet. It was real tears. Li Nanheng supported his arms on both sides of her body and let out a long breath. He sat up by her side and looked down at his desire that couldn't be concealed at all. He closed his eyes, got out of bed and went straight into the bathroom. He quickly and decisively took a cold shower for a few minutes. After the shower he put on his clothes. As he was buttoning his cuffs, he suddenly remembered what Feng Ling called him brother-in-law. Brother-in-law Feng Mingzhu. What did this have to do with the fact that when he got married, he agreed not to inform Ren Baoren, but was mysteriously exposed in the media? What brother-in-law? Li Nanheng was a little puzzled. After showering, he looked at the little woman who was still asleep on the bed. He saw that she was still sleeping in the same position. Chapter 1079. If you didn't marry Feng Mingzhu, who else could it be? I can't call you brother-in-law while shamelessly liking you. These two sentences repeated in his mind. At a certain moment, Li Nanheng looked at Feng Ling's face and his eyes suddenly froze. A possibility that he had never thought of or even dared to think of was about to explode in his mind. When Mrs. Feng, Qin Qiu and her mother saw Feng Ling for the first time, they grabbed her hand and kept asking her if she was a man or a woman and how old she was. Later, when Qin Qiu's mother met him, she casually asked him why Feng Ling didn't come and asked him a lot about Feng Ling. He used to think that the old lady only cared about Feng Ling because she had helped her. Besides, the old lady always cared about children of Feng Ling's age, so he never thought much about it. Why did Feng Ling coincidentally have the surname Feng? This surname was not common in the United States. If there was no reason, an orphan would not have such a surname. She thought he married Feng Mingzhu, so she said she wanted to call him brother-in-law. The cenotaph that he had been married to for 3 years had been decided by him and the Li family. Soon, it would be the time when he could completely regain his freedom after being married for 3 years. The poor second daughter of the Feng family fell into the sea and disappeared at the age of 1. No one believed that it was possible for a 1-year-old child to survive in the vast sea. All kinds of things condensed in Li Nanheng's mind and then exploded little by little. He looked at Feng Ling who was sleeping, and for the first time in his life, he was so nervous and excited that his palms were sweating. It was already 6:30 a.m., and the breakfast that Xiao Su asked someone to prepare had already been delivered. Xiao Su took the dining cart and pushed it to the door. Just as he was about to knock on the door in front of him suddenly opened. He thought he came at the wrong time. Why did boss look like, was he going to be scolded like Special Assistant Shen? However, Li Nanheng only glanced at the breakfast on the dining car and said indifferently, "When she wakes up, arrange for her to see Mrs. Mo. I'm going back to the United States." Xiao Su was startled. "Boss, haven't you already informed Mr. Mo that you will personally send Feng Ling over?" "Right now, I have something more important to do. It's about my life. I need to go back and investigate it. You stay here and watch over her. Tell Mo Jingshan that if she suffers even the slightest injury or grievance in High City, I won't care if his surname is Mo or Bai. I'll take his life all the same." Xiao Su, what the hell? A great event in one's life since ancient times, the major event in a man's life has always been getting promoted, getting rich and getting married. He definitely didn't need to get promoted and get rich. The position of the boss was already high enough and he didn't lack money. That had to do with marrying a wife. Xiao Su looked confused, but Li Nanheng didn't wait for a moment. He walked around the dining car, brushed past Xiao Su expressionlessly, and walked out decisively. Xiao Su turned back to look at Boss Li's swift and decisive back, feeling somewhat confused. Then he pushed the dining car in, only to see that Feng Ling was still sleeping. The corner of Xiao Su's mouth twitched. He had to put the dining car aside. Thinking of what Boss Li said just now, he couldn't let Feng Ling suffer any grievances. He immediately gave up the idea of waking her up and went out to wait. Feng Ling drank on the plane yesterday and slept for the whole morning. She frowned slightly at the dazzling noon sun and turned over in bed. The sober consciousness in her mind gradually returned, and then she suddenly realized that she was on a plane and was about to go to High City. Where was she now? She abruptly opened her eyes and looked at the unfamiliar hotel room. Then she abruptly sat up and looked around. There was no one else here. She was the only one here. Sitting on the bed for a long time, she couldn't remember how she came to the hotel. Then she looked around and found her cell phone, only to see that it was already past 12 o'clock in the afternoon. Did she sleep for so long? How did she get off the plane? There was a knock on the door and at the same time Xiao Su's voice came from outside. "Feng Ling, haven't you woken up?" Feng Ling had a headache. She raised her hand and rubbed her forehead, but she couldn't remember what had happened. She staggered up from the bed and walked to the door to open it. Seeing that she was awake, Xiao Su smiled. "In the morning before boss left, he asked me to prepare breakfast for you, but you drank too much and didn't wake up until now. Breakfast can't be eaten. I'm going to ask someone to prepare something else for you. Go wash up and I'll call you out to eat when it's ready." Feng Ling's hand was still on her head, and she looked at him in confusion. "How did I get off the plane? Do you think I carried you off the plane or did Boss Li carry you off the plane?" Xiao Su kept her in suspense. "Feng Ling." She looked at Xiao Su for a while, thinking of Li Nanheng's indifferent attitude toward her recently. "Did you carry me?" Xiao Su looked at her exasperatedly. She was so stupid. No wonder her relationship with Boss Li was so bumpy. Boss Li didn't really intend to give her the cold shoulder. He was just angered by her. Couldn't she see that with Boss Li around, how could he let another man carry her? What a silly girl. Xiao Su tooted. "You guessed wrong. Hurry up and wash up. I can smell the wine in your mouth when I talk to you." Feng Ling took another step back. She was slightly embarrassed by the taste of wine in her mouth, but she really didn't expect that the bottle of red wine would have such a strong aftereffect. She had never fallen asleep so defenselessly and lost herself in her sleep. When Xiao Su left, she closed the door, thought about it, and turned to walk into the bathroom. When she passed by the bathroom, she glanced at the toilet in the bathroom and looked at it in confusion. She didn't know why the toilet lid was covered, but after a glance she went straight into the bathroom. She took off her clothes and stood under the shower. When she was taking a shower, she suddenly remembered that Xiao Su said she guessed wrong. So it was Li Nanheng who carried her off the plane? Was she so drunk at that time? He came to High City with her, but in the end he had to carry her when she was drunk. He must have been very impatient. As Feng Ling thought about it, she scratched her forehead in annoyance, feeling a little annoyed. She would never drink so much in the future. Just now, Xiao Su said that boss told him something before he left. Before he left, he meant that Li Nanheng left. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.